Good evening. Welcome to the Alameda County Water Board meeting of October 13th, 2022. Please join me in, well, first of all, roll call, and then we can join the Pledge of Allegiance. Roll call, please.
Director Sethy?
Here.
Akbari? Here. Gunther? Huang? Here. Weed?
Here. Director Akbari is joining us virtually. And,
Yeah, I'll just note for the public, I'm feeling pretty ill, and so I consulted with the general manager, and just to comply with the health and safety code that we've set out as a board, I've decided to call in virtually.
all right, thank you. On many levels, thank you. Please join us at the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Let us have the general manager make some introductory comments about the hybrid meeting we have this evening.
Sure thing. Good evening, everybody. On behalf of the ACWD Board of Directors, I'd like to welcome the public's participation in this board meeting. My name is Ed Stevenson, and I serve as the district's general manager. Members of the public may participate in this board meeting in person or remotely by either using the Zoom application or by telephone. Any member of the public present in person who wishes to make comments may approach the speaker's podium at the appropriate time. For those participating remotely, note that the meeting agenda, staff reports, and presentation materials are all available on the district's website at acwd.org. You may reference the instructions at the top of the agenda for how to participate using the controls in the Zoom app or your dial pad if participating by telephone audio. This board meeting is being recorded and will be made available to the public for future viewing. Again, thank you all very much for attending, and that completes my housekeeping remarks.
Thank you. At this time, we have public comments. Is there anyone who wishes to address the board during the public comments? There being none, and no hands raised?
I see no hands raised.
No hands raised online. So we have a consent calendar. Is there anyone who wishes to add items to the consent calendar?
I'll make the motion to add items 5.1, 5.2, and 5.3 to the consent calendar, please.
I'll second.
Moved and second. Do we have a motion to approve the consent calendar as amended?
I'll make the motion.
Second again.
Roll call, please.
So we need to
Well,
take
actually, we should have called for
two
roll
separate
call
votes.
for the first one, and then
Right.
for the amendment, and then we'll go for the as amended. Slipping up.
Director Sethy?
Aye.
Akbari?
Aye.
Gunther? Huang? Aye. And Weed?
Aye. Now, do we have a motion for?
I'll make the motion to adopt the consent calendar as amended. I got it.
Ditto on my earlier second.
Second roll call, please.
Okay. Director Sethy?
Aye.
Akbari?
Aye.
Gunther? Huang? Aye. And Weed?
Aye. All right, thank you. Next, you know what? One of those bittersweet items, which is the resolution honoring Jeanette Rotter on her retirement from the district service.
Yeah, and before I turn this over to our Director of Engineering and Technology, just a quick remark that this is indeed one of those bittersweet moments. We love them and we hate them doing these. And this one in particular is a soft spot for me. I have worked with Judy for every one of her 22 years here. And, you know, there are some people who, when they leave us, they take with them a great deal of expertise and professional capability, technical prowess. And there are other people, when they leave us, they take with them, you know, a big part of our culture and personality. And I really feel that she is both. She means both of those things to ACWD. And it's very, very difficult to see Judy walk out our doors. However, she has left behind a great deal of professionalism and technical expertise and knowledge here. And she has left behind a whole lot of personality and been a big part of our culture. So, I agree, bittersweet, but can't be happier for Junie in her well-deserved retirement. But with that, I will turn it over to our Director of Engineering and Technology, Mr. Groom.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Good evening, President Weed and board members and community members. I would echo Mr. Stevenson's sentiments that this is a bittersweet moment for myself. But it's, all of us wish for those great days when we retire and spend more time with our families. So I want to wish Junie happy retirement. It is indeed my distinct honor to wish Junie congratulations on her retirement after so many years of hard work and service to the district. I have worked with Junie since I joined the district just over a year ago, but honestly, I feel like I have known her for decades. She has a warm and friendly attitude that makes people feel welcome and feel that they are part of the team. She treats everyone with respect and always keeps the district's best interest at heart, and I'm sure most of you have seen this firsthand. Junie is a sought-after expert in pipeline design and has managed numerous capital infrastructure projects and programs ranging from large diameter transmission lines and utility relocations to major property acquisitions and negotiations for the district. As the Development Services Manager, Junie has overseen public water system extension processes for countless development projects. For those of you who have been on the AIT Committee, Engineering and Information Technology Committee, you've seen many of those projects come before you for updates and approvals. So she has had a lot to do with every one of those projects. Junie has a strong work ethic and is well respected by her team. I especially admire her positive energy, kindness, and her collaborative nature. I know I will miss her sense of humor, and as will many of her colleagues and friends at the district. With that, I'd like to read the staff's recommendations for this item. By motion, adopt a resolution honoring Junie Rotter and expressing appreciation for her 22 years of dedicated service with the district. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you like to make some comments, Jenny?
Not much to talk.
No lies in the boardroom, Junie.
That's right, yeah. Yeah, it's 22 years, wow. It seems like just the other day I started. It goes by really fast. I'm fortunate today. I have my husband Greg is here, and one of my kids, Richard is stuck in traffic, I'm sure, but Emily, my daughter's here. They've been a big part of the district as well over these 22 years. And they've been very supportive of me as well. There's district staff here, also some members of my old development team that are here too. I can't imagine a better place to end my career, my professional career, than at ACWD. It's been wonderful. The people have been wonderful. That's probably the biggest thing I'm going to miss. It's like a family. You have your home family and you have your work family. And I've just been honored to be able to work here all these years. And I know that the district is in great hands and, will forever be an excellent place to work.
Thank you very much. Well, we have a resolution for the board to take action on. But would you first like to make some comments?
May I?
Please.
So, Junie, wow. It's been a long time. I think I have seen you in most of my committee assignments. Thank you for being so patient and gentle in answering my sometimes not so wonderful questions. I think what brought to mind is your knowledge, the fact that you anticipate our questions. You always have a very logical, reasonable answer and approaches, even when our questions might have strayed away from the district operations. You are always so good at bringing us back, getting us back to what's important. Every time I see you in committee, I always know you'll be a very pleasant experience just because your wonderful personality and your knowledge always bring a sense of comfort and confidence when I know an item is coming before the board. So I definitely appreciate that. I also appreciate all the kindness you showed towards me when I, first started. I think we started maybe around the same time with some very interesting questions. And thank you to your family. Working at ACWD with a track record like Junie's, it almost guaranteed that families need to be extremely supportive in order for her to perform to the level that she has at ACWD. It's time spent that otherwise you could have spent with your family. So thank you very much for your dedication, for the great conversation, and thank you to your family for allowing us to use up their precious time with you. Have great time in your retirement. It's a new journey. Do something fun, but don't forget us. And I am pretty sure General Manager knows how to contact you if we have questions.
Oh, we know how to contact her.
Oh, yeah.
Although the internet's not that great at her house, I know that, so.
Deliberate or is it not so great in quotation marks? But thank you. Have a great time in retirement and come back and see us.
Thank you. Paul?
Junie, when I learned of your impending retirement, I mentioned to a member of the senior staff here that, I spent my career in Silicon Valley in engineering and everything, and I found you to be a very professional manager, and I said, you are a no-fuss, no-politics manager that just gets the job done. And I really mean that. And I think you, especially in your latter years here as Development Services Manager, leave quite a legacy for the Tri-City area because of all the development in the community that you were supervising. And we certainly did a lot during the last few years under your management. And I especially want to call out two projects because I think they are not well recognized in the community, but in the engineering world, they certainly are. And one is the SFPUC Bay Division Pipeline project on pipelines 3 and 4, which took, I think, 3 years or something like that. And crossing the Hayward Fault right at Mission Boulevard and 680. It was a huge project. And in a lot of the engineering world and engineering magazines, it was profiled as one of the great engineering feats in the entire world. It had not been done except a few times in Japan and Turkey, I believe, some other places in the world. So you are well deserved in your accomplishments on that project. And I want to call out one other, which is the APN tank seismic upgrade project, because that was my father's first design when he joined the water district in the early 60s. And I was board president when I had to sign the papers to tear it all down. But you did a very good job in supervising that project. And my mother was there for the rededication of the new tank when it was completed. So I especially appreciated all your work on that project too. And what's nice about that project, and you're leaving another legacy, is people can see that from almost anywhere in the community, right up there on the hill. I wish you the best in your future, okay?
Well, Jenny, I have the privilege of being the last to speak. Oh, yes, Director Akbari, you have some comments.
Thank you. Judy, I got to share some comments with you last week at the engineering committee meeting. I mentioned then, and I'll bring it up again here. When I first joined the board, Bob Shaver, who's then our general manager, told me that you were one of the first people I should sit down with to get a good sense of how our engineering committee works and also the projects that we're involved in on the development side. And you took so much time to sit with me and to bring me up to speed, and I really, really appreciate that. Like it was mentioned, you're leaving quite a legacy, having been involved in so many projects around the community, and I hope you take a great deal of pride in that. And anytime you come and visit here, I hope you drive by those projects and have a great sense of pride in all of the work that you did. Anytime one of our employees are retiring, I always like to ask them what they're most looking forward to in retirement. So I'll pose that question to you right now, Judy. What are you most excited about in your next chapter?
So I've been waiting to answer that because I've been told by other retirees you asked that question. And, so in true form, I'm actually going to Disneyland. So I've always wanted to say that, yeah. But I'm looking forward to, besides Disneyland, you know, relaxing, starting to play more golf and doing some traveling. So that's what I'm looking forward to.
From what I hear, you might be seeing some other ACWD employees down there.
Yeah, probably.
But I just want to point out that Junie's answer actually is really typical of her.
Yeah.
She prepared.
Well, Judy, I'll wish you all the best in retirement. And yeah, we look forward to hopefully seeing you at some employee picnics and stuff.
Good, thank you.
Thank you, Director Akbari. Well, it's difficult to say or to comprehend the extraordinary workload that you had. ACWD has not seen this level of development and planning and projects, a variety of from the environmental to the actual development in this community, and you kept us on course. It was an extraordinary effort. And you led your team to accomplish it. So it's not just their individual efforts, it's the team leadership, which was so important to ACWD. And I certainly hope you stay in touch. Retirees are welcome at our picnics and other events that we have. And I encourage you to come back and visit and even harass the board on occasion. Tell us what we, now that you're here, you can wear a different hat.
That's right.
But thank you. Let me see if we can have a motion and then we'll make a presentation of the plaque.
So I'll make a motion to adopt a resolution honoring Judy Rotter and expressing appreciation for her 22 years of dedicated service to the district.
Second.
Okay. And a roll call, please.
Director Sethy,
Aye.
Akbari,
Aye.
Gunther, Huang,
Aye.
and Weed.
Aye. And Ginny, let me, presentation.
You want to go down there too?
I guess we can. Well, we'll let them do the usual, just the two of them.
Join them after.
Yeah, I know.
You have one with them too?
We'll take a picture with just the two of them, then we'll join them.
Don't worry, Director Akbari, we can Photoshop you into that photo. Got some talented people here.
Next, I'd like to take an item out of order. We have a consultant under staff presentations, item 6.3.1, which is a fiscal year 2021-22 investment portfolio report.
That's right, and for this item, I'll ask our Director of Finance and Administration, John Wunderlich, to get us started.
Can
Great, thank you.
Can I actually, hold on just a sec. President Wee, do you want to take a few minutes to say goodbye, to Junie's family, or you want to proceed? That's up to you.
Well, I think if we have
We
a
can
consultant
proceed.
that we want to
All right, that's fine.
be able to make a presentation, then we can go out and join them. Thank you.
Okay?
Please.
Okay,
My apologies.
so good evening, members of the board, staff, and public. This is our annual report to the board on the results from the past fiscal year of our investment portfolio. And this presentation is actually going to be given by Mariana Grajeda, our accounting and treasury manager, who is responsible for day-to-day oversight of the portfolio. And we also have with us this evening, and this is why we've taken this out of order, we do appreciate the accommodation. We do have Mr. Carlos Oblitas, who is our account manager with Chandler Asset Management, and he's available to answer any questions the board may have on this item. And so with that introduction, I will turn it over to Ms. Grajeda to walk us through the presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Wunderlich, and good evening, members of the board, members of the public and staff, and congratulations to Judy on her retirement. So as mentioned, this evening I will be presenting to you the investment performance for the fiscal year ending June 30, 2022 for the district's managed portfolio. Next slide, please. Since the focus of this presentation is more on the performance of the portfolio, I am not going to spend too much time on the economic update. We just included a summary of the events that happened during the fiscal year for reference, and this you can read at your own leisure. So this slide has that summary. Next slide, please. Okay, so during the fiscal year, there were three significant events that occurred or that took place for the district. And the first event that happened was on May 2022. The district launched a new strategy for long-use district funds. So we did this in order to align the long-term liabilities of the district, such as the pension and OPEB liabilities and capital projects, with our long-term investments. As a result of this action, a new portfolio was created with securities that have maturities ranging from 1 to 10 years. And this is allowed per the California Government Code and also per the district's policy. The new portfolio was funded with existing securities, and because of this, the starting year to maturity rate was at 1.55%. However, any new purchases for the portfolio were earning now between 2.75% and 4.10%. This leads me to the next event that happened during the fiscal year, which was a raising rate environment. We started to see an increase in rates on the second half of the fiscal year, and as a result of this, the district's investments on paper are actually lower. However, the increase in rates actually generated more income revenue for the district. The last event that happened during the fiscal year was the Securities and Exchange Commission updated its definition of a qualified institutional buyer. And now it includes local governments that have over $100 million of investable assets, which is the case for the district. As a result, the district now has an increased diversification of investments because it has now access to securities that were only available to those qualified institutional buyers. Next slide, please. Aside from the events that I just discussed, staff is also responsible for monitoring the district's investments with the California Code and the district's policy. So I'm happy to report that for the fiscal year, ending June 30, 2022, all investment categories were in compliance, and you can see this in the next two slides. Next slide. Next one. Okay, now I'm going to go over some of the characteristics of the portfolio. In addition to being in compliance, the portfolio continues to be a high credit quality portfolio. As you can see from this slide, the average quality rating is a AA, which is very similar to last year. Our market value for the year was a little bit over $169 million, which again, it's a little bit under from last fiscal year, but still in line. We also ended the year with an average purchase yield of 1.4%, 48% for the combined portfolio. This includes the long-term and the short-term portfolios. However, any new purchases or any reinvestments of securities that mature, we're actually earning an average market yield of 3.18%. And this is again due to the increase in rates. Next slide. So for this slide, I just wanted to, include the distribution of the securities. As you can see, we continue to be very well diversified, with most of our funds invested in U.S. Treasuries, U.S. agencies, and corporate notes. Again, these are very high-quality securities, and a quarter of those investments are in each of these categories. Next slide. As I mentioned earlier, the district launched a new long-term strategy in May of this year. This chart just presents the maturity distribution for the portfolio. And as you can see, most of the investments continue to have maturities between 1 to 3 years, but we're now starting to gradually purchase securities with maturities over 5 years. And the ones that we qualify for this are usually the U.S. Treasury, the U.S. agency, and the municipal securities. Next slide. So the chart below, again, I don't want to spend too much time in this. We just wanted to show, the decline in the interest rate and the environment that we were operating during the fiscal year. We started to see a decline on the rates around April 2020, and this was a result of the pandemic. And they continued to drop all the way to the end of the calendar year 2021. However, we started to see the interest rate picking up on the second half of the fiscal year, and they have continued to rise to this date. Next slide. So as a result of the increase in interest rates, the district has seen an increase in investment income for the fiscal year. The amount of earnings for each month, which directly impacts the budget, is noted on the first table of this slide. For the fiscal year, it was a little bit over $3.5 million. However, with the increased rates, there is a decrease in the value of the portfolio on paper. And, I just want to mention this decrease in value only impacts our annual financial statements. And as you can see on the last two tables, the district had an unrealized gain at June 30, 2020 of $6.8 million. And that gradually decreased to $3.7 million on June 30, 2021. But for the current fiscal year that covers this presentation, we actually had an unrealized loss of a little bit over $7.9 million, which resulted in a total change in fair value on paper again of $11.3 million. Next slide. So the last thing I just want to cover is that, even with the decrease in the value of the investments and the actions that were taken during the fiscal year, the district managed portfolio continues to perform very well. As we can see on the table at the bottom of this slide, although the annualized rate of return since inception, that is since Chandler took over the portfolio, and for the past 12 months, even though it was negative, the portfolio continues to outperform the two benchmarks that we currently use to measure the performance, and this is a good thing. So with that, this concludes my presentation, and we will be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Is there any member of the public that has shown a hand? If not,
We don't see any hands up right now.
no comments from the people here and attending, then let us go to Director Akbari. Did you have any comments?
None at this time.
Nothing for me.
Yes, Director Sethy?
Yes, I have several comments. So this was reviewed in the Finance Committee, and I wanted to note that I am enthusiastic about the fact that we have the opportunity to extend the investment horizon out beyond 5 years, up to 7 years, given new legislation, so we can balance our portfolio in a better way. Nevertheless, most of our investments are in the 1 to 5 year maturity range. And as all of us have witnessed, just over the last year, interest rates have been going up dramatically. And today, the 2-year Treasury rates were hovering right around 4%, 10-year around 4.4, 4.3. And so the district can expect a certain reward in the coming years right now. I would say outsized performance results. If you just take $100 million and 4% returns, we're making $4 million a year. And so I'm hoping that we will use this money wisely and not tonight, but perhaps over time, take a serious look at how we may use those excess returns to better fulfill our unfunded liabilities. I also wanted to note that I presented a very interesting historical chart to our senior staff and President Weed, which I think, you know, it's hard to put things in a long-term perspective during our own lifetimes, but I'd like to do it right now. We are now entering the 4th bond bear market in the history of the country. Imagine that. When we were founded, Alexander Hamilton and future Treasury secretaries organized the government in such a wise way that we built confidence around the world. And we had a bullish bond market, people investing in the new country of the United States all the way until after the Civil War, when we entered the first bear bond market. Second one happened in the early 1900s, and the third one started, the third bond bear market, right after World War II, and lasted until 1981. I think many of us can remember when mortgage rates were up near 17, 18, 19% in the early 80s under Ronald Reagan's first administration. Fed Chair Volcker managed to tamp things down, and for most of our living experience, largely because of his action and other Federal Reserve chairs that followed, one who just won the Nobel Prize this past week, Chairman Bernanke, we have seen interest rates drop for 40 years, from 1981 until this past year, when we reached close to zero interest rate levels and even negative interest rate levels during the pandemic, not only here in the United States, but around the world. And I saw that today mortgage rates have reached a 20-year high. So the impact of what's going on right now is really important, not only in our personal lives, but in the life of this water district and how we invest our money. And so what is good for some people on one day is bad for another person on another day. But right now, at least for the near-term future, as we enter this 4th bond bear market in U.S. history, which could last, you know, for well over a decade or more, based on history, we need to be cognizant of the future expected returns that we're going to be getting on our portfolio. And I'm really praying that we will invest that money wisely. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you. The good news and the bad news of this type of investment portfolio is it's short term. or less than 3 years. And so when we see changes in market value, they normalize out at the termination of each of the various investments and securities. We have a consultant here, and is the consultant going to be also making a presentation, or?
I think the consultant's available to answer questions and get into some detail if the board would like.
Okay. I did have some questions for the consultant, but first let me see if there's any questions at all from Director Akbari. None. Director Huang? Director? No. The question I have, and for this more of an educational standpoint, I understand, there has been concern that with investments and for social and political reasons, and the one that comes to a head currently is Russia. And my understanding is that we have no investments in Russia, and we follow a U.S. protocol. So can you explain what those might be?
Absolutely. Let me begin by reiterating what you just said, which is exactly right. We do not have any exposure in this portfolio, direct exposure to Russia. The State Department has an Office of Asset Control, which has rules that have to be followed. There's also a decree from Sacramento, from the governor of California, which has decreed that any entities, any public entities in the state of California have to divest of any of those. You never held any in the portfolio. This was done as part of the greater sanctions that were placed upon the Russian nation as a result of the invasion and the war in Ukraine. So right now, you had, even before this, you had no exposure. There are no Russian issuers, nor are you allowed to buy any Russian banks, even if they were legal because they were issuing debt in the United States, nor can you buy any sovereign debt from the Russian nation by law, and by credit quality, they wouldn't even apply to this portfolio. So you are in the clear in that aspect.
And the next level would be to investments in companies that are doing business in Russia. Is there another layer or screening mechanism for looking at investments?
Much like we do screen for that. Particularly, we screen for it in as much as it's going to impact the underlying fundamentals of the company. In the past, that's how we've done it. What's happening with those nations that have business operations in Russia is that they have scrambled and exited out of that market because of the sanctions, the aforementioned sanctions by the State Department and the federal government.
Okay. Just noticed that Nissan had sold all of their assets for €1 or 1 ruble, whichever it was.
That's correct.
All right. Thank you. And I'd also note that when I asked that question at the JPIA, where I'm the representative, company PFM did acknowledge that they do have Russian investments in the portfolio that the Aqua JPIA was invested in. So hopefully it'll be addressed.
It's interesting to note. I do know the rep. I think you probably dealt with Sarah Meacham from PFM. They're a competitor of ours, but I know them well because I was a director at that company at one point in my career. But we screen for these things because 95% of our clients are local governments, and as a local government, not only do you have a fiduciary duty with these funds to the public, but also you're under a microscope. This is these are public funds, and people have the right to be able to see what's happening in there. So we're very sensitive to issues like that. We just don't want to buy something that's going to put you in a bad light.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for doing a very good job managing our investments, too.
All right. Well, great. Do we have any other? This is a report, no action required.
President, we may make one other comment.
Please.
One of the things that is I'd like to underscore here is through the years that we've been managing our investments and overseeing this in the Finance Committee, we've always tried to set benchmarks, Director Weed and I, against market indices to indicate whether we are outperforming or performing at least at the level of the rest of the market. And I take this job seriously as a director on the board representing the community and the community's investment. And so we are in continuing years outperforming the market indices that most people are indexed to. And that is very rare for a public organization to do that. And I feel like that is a recognizable achievement on the part of our district that should be noted. Thank you.
Thank you. We have no request for members of the public?
Mr. Kelly A. has his hand up.
Mr. Kelly, please.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to excoriate the Federal Reserve, where last spring in spring 2021, the news headline said that they were calling the inflation transitory, and they kept interest rates near zero, and they ascribed the inflation that they were seeing to temporary factors. They deserve to be a full measure of criticism for that. And if we're going to be talking about, history and stuff, which I'm into that kind of history, very much so. The most influential economist of the 20th century, his name was John Maynard Keynes. Throw out a little quote from him. In the long run, we are all dead. Economists set themselves too easy, too useless a task. If in tempestuous seasons, they can only tell us that when the storm is long past, the ocean is flat again. And how does that apply to investment portfolios and bond investments and stuff? I'll pat myself on the back. Somebody came to me and said that their investment advisor was telling them to set up their portfolio exactly like you would expect them to be set up with some amount of bonds in there. And I said, are you crazy? Don't you see that interest rates are going to be going up, and everybody knows that they're going to be going up? And why would you buy any bonds? And I told them to go and put their money in the bank, or go buy some short-term stuff like with the durations of like a few days or a few weeks or something, as short as possible. And of course they went ahead and did what I told them, and they're very happy that they don't have hardly any bonds, so there's one investor out there who avoided all this. I don't think it's possible for a public agency like this one to do that, because I don't think public agencies have the leeway, the freedom to do the right thing. I think everybody's got to do the usual, the traditional investment theories and hold longer-term bonds, or do exactly what you're doing. I don't see a way out of it. But if there were a way out of it, I would have told you to get out of it a year ago. But I don't think it's possible. So yeah, I think the conventional wisdom here, just because it only happened 4 times in the last 100 or 200 years, or whatever the long-term bond bear market, whatever it is, it shouldn't have been that much of a surprise to the Fed a year ago or 2 years ago. Thanks. Bye.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Kelly. Mr. Brew. And there are other comments? There being none, thank you for coming to our district and their presentation, and thank our staff for their input and information. Thank you. Now let's go back to our regular agenda, which is under the action calendar. Item 5.5, which is an authorization of an amendment to lease with the City of Fremont for a firing range training near Patterson Reservoir.
Yes, and again, thanks to the board for indulging us and allowing us to change up the order of the agenda a bit. Appreciate that. So this item 5.5 will be introduced by Laura Heides, our Director of Water Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. And before I begin the report on this item, I just want to acknowledge and thank 2 people who are here today with us in support of this item. Jimmy Chen, Facilities and Real Property Manager from the City of Fremont, is joining us on Zoom. And Michelle Myers, Groundwater Resources Manager, is here in the audience, also in support of this item. So the City of Fremont has been using a portion of the district's Patterson Reservoir property for police officers' outdoor firing range training since 1969. The 2010 amendment to lease between the city and the district has expired, and a second amendment to lease with a new 5-year term has been developed that protects the district's interests by ensuring that the property is surrendered to the district free of contamination, including any other contamination identified in future environmental assessments, prohibiting the use of chemical tactical training devices other than noise flash diversionary devices, providing district use of the premises when making improvements to Patterson Reservoir, and addressing city improvements to the premises. The second amendment to lease was most recently presented at the Water Resources and Conservation Committee on September 27th, 2022. Approval of this amendment will help meet the district's strategic plan goal 1.1, efficiently manage and maintain our infrastructure to ensure reliability. So tonight's staff recommendation is by motion, authorize the general manager to sign the second amendment to lease with the city of Fremont for the use of a portion of the district's Patterson Reservoir property for firing range training. And we're here and happy to answer questions on this item.
All right. There's no hands up from the public that I can see. So Director Akbari, did you have a comment, a question?
I guess the only question, I'm happy to support this item, but a question would be around any safety issues that may have come up in the past, and what we've done to address them.
That's a great question, and I can say that we've anticipated a number of potential safety situations in the future that we're asking the city to be sure to take care for, and much of that is outlined in the agreement. But I will ask Michelle Myers in the audience if she wants to comment on that question as well, of any past safety issues.
Thank you, Ms. Heides. There has not been any safety issues. So we've worked collaboratively with the city since 1969, and we haven't had any incidences.
Okay, thank you. That's my only question.
Great, thanks.
No questions from me, but just a comment. I had the pleasure of having this item in committee. I just want to say thank you to staff. You have anticipated all my questions regarding liability to the district. So thank you for keeping that in mind and building that into the agreement.
Yeah, I support approval of this item, but I would like to note a couple of things. I'm glad to see that the type of ammunition that's being used and the material that it's being shot into is changing so that we minimize the residual effect of lead and other issues. Having been up there a number of times, I was there on one occasion when the SWAT team was doing some exercises. Unfortunately, we didn't bring earplugs with us. But I did learn a lot that day, just incidentally, it wasn't planned, about how well our Fremont police force really takes their job seriously and practices and everything. I would like to ask one question, though, about the road that leads up to Patterson Reservoir and maintenance. We have the new recreational area that's out there from East Bay Regional Park District. And I would just like to make sure that, because I don't understand it, what are the cost sharing arrangements on maintenance of the road and other issues that may impact the public around there?
So in the agreement, actually, the city evaluates the condition of the road up to the firing range, and they actually perform the maintenance on the road.
That's good to know. And there's no issues with more members of the public going out there for recreational activities?
There's gates to prevent that, but it's something that we will be keeping an eye on, especially as the park continues to get developed.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great, thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you for your diligence in putting this together. It seems to have come back several times over the course of the last year.
You know, I would like to also note that with this agreement going back to 1969, part of the history here is that we've always tried to be a good neighbor with fellow agencies in the area. And so I think our agreement is very nominal in terms of cost to the city of Fremont. And I hope they appreciate the fact that we're trying to do our best as a good neighbor policy, too.
Great, thank you. Good comment. If there's no further comment from the public or the board.
I did see a hand up, yeah.
Mr. Nishimura? Yes.
Yes, I was just going to comment. I believe Director Huang may have touched on it. You know, I do go up there quite often. And I do support the district renewing this lease. As Director Sethy mentioned, you know, it's always good to be supportive of our sister or our collaborative with our neighborhood agencies. But you know, this is a firing range. Even though I trust all the precautions that one would take are in effect, you know, you can never drive the accident rate to zero. And I just wanted to make sure that there is adequate language in the agreement such that the city will completely indemnify the district, and that if something untoward does occur, that the district has zero liability, and that the city would protect the district in case there's legal action. That's all.
Thank you. Do you wish to respond to the question of liability?
I think our legal counsel.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So this is an amendment to the lease. The risk allocation provisions haven't changed, and those are in the original lease. And they do provide indemnity protection to the district, and the city does take responsibility not only for indemnifying us from personal injuries and property damage, but there's significant remediation provisions in the lease that were really hammered out in the First Amendment. And so I've looked at this from a legal perspective, and the district is protected.
Thank you. All right. With the comments, there's no further comment from the public or the board. Do we have a motion?
I'll make the motion.
I'll second.
The motion to approve the staff recommendation. Roll call, please.
Director Sethy,
Aye.
Akbari,
Aye.
Gunther, Huang,
Aye.
and Weed.
Aye. Thank you. The next is an item 5.6, which is an authorization of amendment of professional services agreement for the PFAS treatment study at groundwater facilities.
Yeah, thank you, President Reed. And to introduce this item, I'll turn it over to our Director of Engineering and Technology, Mr. Groomer-Woke.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Good evening, board members and community members. One of the district's significant strategic goals is ensuring a safe and reliable water supply to our customers 100% of the time. The district has taken a proactive approach in dealing with emerging contaminants in our water supply, including PFAS chemicals, which are also known as forever chemicals. The regulatory environment regarding PFAS, as you know, is still in flux, and at the August board workshop, staff presented the district's approach to designing and constructing a 6 MGD facility to treat 2 of the known notification levels chemicals, but also make sure that that facility is expandable to a 15 MGD facility in the future if and when needed. With that, I will turn it over to our project engineering manager, Ms. Rekha Ipagunta, who will make a brief presentation to the board. I also want to point out that Mr. Ben Egger, project engineering supervisor, is here to help answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Okay, good evening, members of the board and members of the public and staff. Thank you, Mr. Vogt, for the introduction of the topic. So, starting with a brief background on PFAS, can we go to the next slide, please? So, ACWD has a strategic goal to deliver water with PFAS concentrations below the notification level. The notification level is set by Division of Drinking Water, and basically it's at a level at which there is no significant impact to public health. And as the board is aware, we have developed a proactive PFAS response plan. So far, we have been voluntarily monitoring the groundwater since June 2020. And so we have identified PFAS compounds in our groundwater, both in the Maury and PD well fields. Since then, we have made some operational changes, some strategic operational changes to our production and distribution system. Those changes helped us keep the notification levels below the PFAS levels below the notification level. However, it impacted our production capacity and also increased our SFPUC imported water usage. So district funded a PFAS project. We do have CIP line items both for the study project and also the treatment, the interim treatment plant project. We have a total of about $6.5 million in the CIP and also our financial planning model. Next slide, please. So in the next few slides, I will specifically touch on the interim PFAS treatment project. So since we started the monitoring plan and our proactive response to PFAS, board authorized a professional services agreement with Trestle Technologies for PFAS treatment study. And based on the results of the study, we also had a budget in the PSA for design, for continuing with design. So that was approved in 2022. And most recently in August 2022, the project team presented an update on the PFAS project. General highlights of the information that was shared during the recent board workshop. One is a 6 MGD treatment facility, ion exchange treatment facility would be required to meet the current notification levels. We currently have notification for 2 PFAS compounds. And DDW, Division of Drinking Water, also announced a potential future notification level for PFH excess, and that could potentially require us to expand our treatment capacity to 15 MGD. And additionally, even today, we don't have a maximum contaminant levels for PFAS compounds. They're yet to be established. In light of this new information, the project team presented a revised or modified project scope during the board workshop to expand the design to 15 MGD, but still continue to focus on the 6 MGD treatment facility. Next slide, please. So based on the revised scope that was presented at the board workshop to expand the design to 15 MGD, but still the intent is to continue with construction at 6 MGD, which is required to meet the current notification levels. So this expanded or revised scope requires an amendment to our professional services agreement with Trestle. Primarily, there are 2 drivers that's leading to this PSA amendment. One is the increased project complexity. This was discovered during the basis of design and also during the preliminary design of the 6 MGD facility. And these complexities would be required regardless of the size of the treatment facility we would be going forward with. And the second driver for the PSA amendment is the scope change. As I mentioned earlier, we have modified the scope to expand from 6 to 15 MGD just for the design of the facility that would provide us to take the design construction all the way to 15 MGD. So the initial amount that was authorized by the board in January 2022, that was to a total amount of $1,363,127. The proposed, the current amendment cost is $1,293,588. So in addition to those 2 primary drivers, we also have some funding added to this amendment to support the permitting, coordination, and public outreach activities. Next slide, please. Okay, so here is a process diagram showing the complexity of the facility. During the preliminary design process, we discovered that to integrate the new ion exchange treatment system with our 2 well fields and also integrate that into our blender facility, we had to add additional pumping and pretreatment to our system. So this is just provide a visual of what additional processes are required to treat the PFAS. So the additional project scope that was included in the current amendment include the feed pumping system that is required to control the flow through the ion exchange system and also through the bypass, because we are expecting that we would be treating about 75% of the production facility. And we also have some piping and appurtenances, changes to the piping. Additional process control, instrumentation, and SCADA improvements are also required as part of this project. There are some significant electrical improvements that would be necessary. We would be adding a transformer, a switchboard, and variable frequency drives, and programmable logic controller, in other words, PLC. Okay, so here is the 15 MGD ion exchange facility that would be designed. So it just provides you the general footprint of a 15 MGD facility. This 15 MGD facility, as I mentioned, shows 7 trains, ion exchange trains of treatments, 2 vessels per each train, working in lead lag condition. And this is on paper. This is the footprint we would need if we have to eventually go to 15 MGD facility. Next slide, please. So this is the footprint of the facility once we construct the 6 MGD treatment plant. So in design on paper, we'll have a 15 MGD facility. It's a modular design that could go anywhere. It could be scaled from 6 up to 15 MGD. However, the intent of this project is to build a 6 MGD ion exchange facility. Next slide, please.
May I interrupt and ask a question?
Of course.
On that previous line. Why would you not start with the 3-level train first, where you're showing it's for future expansion, rather than start with 3 out of 4 on the other one?
So the 3 train is required for the 6 MGD facility that is required to meet the current notification levels. And the reason the design is going to accommodate the modular approach. If we have to increase the capacity from 6 to 15, we are ensuring that the future proofing is incorporated into the design, and also increasing the capacity would be adding more modules to the existing design. So that's the intent.
But if you only need 3 to start for 6 MGD, why not start on the right-hand side with where you're showing future expansion, rather than with the 4-level train, where you're using 3 of 4 units?
Yeah.
We are actually going with the 3 trains only.
Yeah, but why not start with the 3 that are on the right-hand side and leave the other 4 for future expansion?
Got it. That's just a visual that we are showing here. So there will be additional modifications when we actually get into the preliminary design. So there is also a new well that we are showing there. This is not the exact size of the facility that we are showing. This is just a visual of how it's going to be laid out. Actually, in reality, when we build it, we'll be able to move it according to the needs of the project.
Yeah, well, I'm a little confused because in an earlier slide you said we're going to only construct for 6 MGD. So I would think the preferred route is to build the right-hand side of 3 units first, utilize that, and use the other 4 for future expansion.
Yeah, and I think one thing, we don't have all the components labeled here, but if you look inside that green area, you can see that there's more equipment on the left side than there is on the right side. So on the left side, you have little boxes there, that's some motor controls and switch gear that we've got to put somewhere, but for both the 6 and the 15. So the idea is we put it on on the larger side because there's more room right there. And then also there's what looks like a sort of oval, that's a hydropneumatic tank, and there's some other equipment that, again, is required for the 6 as well as the 15. The idea is to build all that because it's required for everything. We don't expand that initial set of vessels out as far as we could because we don't need that capacity. But that's the reason why the 6 is shown on the left side, even though you're right, the capacity of vessels could have been achieved on the right-hand side, but we need the other space for all the other equipment and gear that goes along with it, with that first phase even.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. And also, I want to add to that, the piping arrangement will also be in line with the initial 6 MGD facility on the other side. So there are some advantages with going with that. Although the final design, we are still in the preliminary phase of the design.
Okay, and I had another question. I'm sorry I'm asking these before you're finished with presentation, but
No problem.
we have the foundation of the old water softening plant on that same site. There's a plaque there actually in the ground, the historical marker. Are we planning on building over that area?
That's not the current plan. That's actually on the opposite side of this, exactly opposite side of what we are showing as an exchange. So that's not going to be touched as part of this project, but eventually that would be saved for any future.
Can you point to it? Because there's a huge concrete foundation where that old water softening plant was.
This is the area where the existing softening plant is right now.
Okay.
So on the, if I'm orienting north as the top, so the bottom side, the south is the south side of the drawing is showing the
Okay, got it.
the softening plant.
Thank you.
Thank you. Please continue. Please continue.
Thank you. Okay, so this is kind of going into the breakdown of the professional services agreement and the revised, the amended costs. Before I go into these details, I want to just take a moment to summarize the overall project cost here, just for purely for the design services. So as I mentioned before, board authorized $1,363,127 previously for providing design services for the 6 MGD facility, and also providing study, bench scale study was also included as part of that board authorization. And today, as part of this amendment, staff is requesting additional $1,293,588. And that brings the total design services of the project to $2,626,000, which is about 7% of the total construction estimate if we eventually go to a 15 MGD facility. General industry range is 10 to 15% would be for design services of the total construction cost, just to put that into perspective. And then going back to the amendment breakdown, so as I mentioned before, the amendment would be necessary to incorporate the added complexity of the 6 MGD facility. So the total cost of that amendment, that portion of the amendment is about $470,000, which is 37% of the overall request. And then the second piece is, in light of the changing notification levels and unknown MCLs with the projected risk, so the proposed design to design a larger 15 MGD facility that would allow us to go with a phased construction approach. That's going to be about 52% of the overall request. And in terms of dollars, it's adding up to about $670,000. And then we also have 11% of the amendment costs related to startup activities, permit coordination, public outreach, and other activities. Next slide, please. So the next steps after if we receive the board authorization for this PSA amendment, plan is to continue with the preliminary design for the expanded 15 MGD facility. The major milestones coming up on this project, CEQA adoption is expected in March, April timeframe. And then we are also planning to proceed with pre-purchased equipment that currently are identified to have long lead times, including electrical equipment and vessels. So we'll be proceeding with those pre-purchased equipment. And that is expected to, we expect that to bring that back to the board sometime in April, May 2023. And the construction award is expected in July, August 2023. So the overall construction duration is going to be about 1 year. The facility will be ready for commissioning in August, September 2024. So staff recommendation by motion authorize the general manager to execute an amendment to the professional services agreement with Trussell Technology in an amount not to exceed $1,293,588 to provide additional engineering and professional services for the PFAS treatment study at ACWD's groundwater facilities project job number 10119. Thank you. I would be happy to take any additional questions.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from members of the public? I see no hands raised, no one in the audience making a comment. Let's go, Director Akbari. Did you have a question or comment?
I don't have any questions. Director Gunther and I had a chance to review this in the Engineering and IT Committee meeting just last week, so I will be supporting it. I'll just reiterate that we're working hard at the district to address changing regulatory requirements, and I think this is the smartest way that we can approach it. Thank you.
Dr. Huang?
I agree with Director Akbari's comment that we need this in order to adapt to the changing regulatory requirement. I must say, you're also very good at anticipating my questions. I wrote it down, and you answered it in slide number 8. I was actually very curious about why our professional services costs literally doubled, right? One would say, ideally, when you expand the size of a design of a treatment plant, the professional services cost usually does not double. So I was going to ask you for the percent breakdown, but slide number 8 actually answered my question really nicely, so thank you.
Dr. Sethy?
No other questions. Thank you for answering the ones I had.
Thank you. This is a request for $1,300,000 in addition to what we've spent so far, but an equal amount. But what is the anticipated total cost of the project for both the 6 MGD and the 15 MGD ion exchange?
Yes, the total construction, the total cost of the project, including design services and construction and district labor, everything together, we currently have $17,666,000, so that's the current estimate. And of course, the estimate will be revised as we take this project into the preliminary design.
So 17 million for the...
17,600,000.
And then for the 15 million?
That's adding up to around $37 million.
37 million. All right. And this is ion exchange.
That is correct.
First of all, disclosure, I serve on an ad hoc committee being led by Edgar Dimely, who's chair of the AWWA Water Quality Committee and works for the Metropolitan District, along with about a half a dozen other people. And this is one of the great concerns, because I call it one of the black swans coming down the pike in the water industry. One of the concerns is the components of concern, which there are many thousands of different compounds that fit into PFAS, only a few of which have currently been identified as being issues. Have we done a study to determine which of those compounds of concern we have in our groundwater?
We have been monitoring as part of the monitoring plan. Nearly 20 compounds have been monitored so far. And we are taking the lead based on the Division of Drinking Water, where there are currently 2 compounds that were identified for a notification level. So those are the compounds that are giving us a direction in terms of what the design or the treatment capacity should be.
Have you determined if these are short chain or long chain compounds?
These are, I would want to verify that again. I believe these are short chain compounds. And the treatment technology was, when we did the bench scale testing, it confirmed that it could treat both short chain and long chain compounds. So that was confirmed during the bench scale testing.
Comment was made in one of the sessions I went to that ion exchange is far more effective with long chain compounds than it is with short chain compounds. So if we're finding a short chain, that raises a concern.
I would have to confirm that, Director Weed.
Yeah, it's my understanding it's actually both. Out of the constituents that we're monitoring for right now, there are both. I think the PFHXS is a shorter chain, but we know that there's a whole family of these compounds. We are looking into monitoring for total fluorinated hydrocarbons, and also some of the regulatory developments seem to be heading in that direction too. So we're aware of that. All the compounds that we are concerned about, that we know about so far, we have tested with this ion exchange process through the bench scale testing, and it's worked very well with them.
Okay. Have we made any attempt to fingerprint the compounds to determine if they come from a particular manufacturer?
We haven't identified that fingerprinting of the source, to my knowledge.
Okay. One of them, again, the comments, that is part of the litigation which a number of law firms have got involved in. One of the major efforts has been to fingerprint it so they can trace it back to one of several chemical companies which are anticipated to have significant resources to help reimburse it.
If I could make an additional comment on that. So yeah, we have seen some studies that show 1 or 2 manufacturing companies that have predominantly manufactured these compounds and chemicals, but we haven't done particular analysis to see if the compounds that we found in our groundwater sources are linked to those specific manufacturers.
Okay. The state has recently adopted a criteria of 3 parts per trillion for their reporting. But the EPA has listed the level of concern at 7,500 times the concentration below that. It's also my understanding that the technology to be able to achieve, to have a higher level of confidence in being able to reach these extraordinarily low levels, well below the detection levels, which might be currently 2, so the state bumped it to 3 parts per trillion, is reverse osmosis. Have we done a preliminary cost estimate of what it will cost if we find that we need to go to a reverse osmosis treatment, that this current ion exchange will not achieve the goals as they are continually being developed? What would be the cost incremental change going from these $17 million to $37 million projects? Would be a multiple of that if we went to reverse osmosis?
Are you talking about putting in a real desal plant there?
Well, this would be a reverse osmosis does work with desal. It may be the solution for PFAS.
We have conducted preliminary analysis for future expansion to reverse osmosis if necessary, but at this point, for PFAS, ion exchange is found to be the best technology that's available in the industry, particularly focusing on removing PFAS at this time, and this wouldn't exclude expanding in future if required.
Yeah, and as I recall, our work early on in the process was to try and identify the best available technologies. RO was one that we looked at. As I recall, the multiplier is 3 to 4 times the cost of ion exchange. There are other issues surrounding RO, including, concentrate discharge and the impact on our water supplies of having to discharge a fair amount of the overall water that we're treating, where ion exchange doesn't have that issue. That's not to say that ultimately we won't need to go to RO on that facility or elsewhere, not just to deal with this issue, but many other potential issues. And so we continue to look at that. You'll note that the location that Ms. Ipacunta showed as to where we're planning to put the ion exchange equipment on this site is about as far sort of south on the site as there is greenfield available, and the remaining part toward the north, toward the railroad tracks, is all sort of being reserved for future treatment infrastructure out there.
Okay, thank you.
May I add a comment when you're done?
Please, when you finish, I have a series of more questions. So.
Yeah, when you're done.
Ion exchange. It's my understanding that each that uses a resin, which is then taken to, is considered to be, will be considered, we believe, a hazardous waste. And will have to be incinerated as an organic fluorine, raised to 600 degrees Celsius, which is over 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit, to incinerate it, or deposited in a hazardous, certified hazardous waste site. But not only do you have that issue of trying to deal with the contaminant, I understand each of the manufacturers that are available, the resins, are proprietary. And therefore, we have once you go into a contract, you're locked into that vendor. Do we have any cost controls that we are looking at in these contracts as we go down the path? Or is it basically an open issue if we have a sole source provider for the resin?
When we conducted the bench scale testing, there were multiple resins that were identified to perform very well for the water quality that we have. So it's not necessarily that we would have to sole source to a particular vendor, so we'll have some options there. And then in terms of discharging, so the vendor who would be providing the resin will eventually be responsible for removing the resin once it reaches the complete useful life. So at that point, we are accounting for hazardous waste disposal at this point. The project already accounted for that. It depends on the contract that we put together with the vendor. So the vendor will eventually be responsible for installing the resin and also removing the spent resin and disposing it off as per the requirements of the code.
But get certification, each of these resins will have to be shown to work with our water supply. Or do we have a plan to test more or to certify more than one resin for this project?
In this case, we would have to go through the bidding process, our regular procurement process, to identify a particular resin that is already tested as part of our bench scale testing. So we'll be using those as part of our specifications. So we'll go through the bidding process and identify the vendor, so they will eventually be installing the resin. And in future, if we want to change based on the performance, satisfactory performance of the resin, we will have an opportunity to change the contract at that time.
And we will have indemnity from the person or company that is taking the resins, that they will properly handle this, what we expect to be a hazardous waste.
That is correct. That would be part of our contract with the resin providers.
Since this is evolving, have we given consideration to looking at total organic fluorine as our measure, as opposed to specific PFOS, so that we do a generic organic fluorine measurement to determine what our level of efficiency is, effectiveness?
We continue to monitor that, but we haven't really measured to the level of to that level where we have an understanding of how that would impact this.
Well, that is a theme that has come out of the AWWA Water Quality Committees, to look at trying to come up with a more generic term as opposed to looking at scores of individual compounds where they keep tossing more into the mix.
Yeah, and like I mentioned, and that is something that we're looking at, the methods for doing that. I'm not sure if we have an update, but it is something we're looking into seeing if we can, because we understand that this is a large family of compounds. We're actively monitoring for a portion of that family. And we also understand that this is being discussed in the regulatory environment too. So we want to see what we can do right now to understand the totals. But we've not begun any sampling or testing for that yet.
Okay. I understand we're going down a path. It's a major dollar amount. But I believe that there are other technologies such as nanofiltration, which is beyond ultrafiltration, where we burned $30 million on ultrafiltration that never really worked well. Nanofiltration is another option, and then reverse osmosis being possibly the most effective, theoretically, for being able to remove all of the various compounds. But in any case, it appears that we're going into an unknown. We're going to be spending on an initial 6 million gallon a day, $17 million for a project. We want to expand that to 37 million. Inflation will kick it up. But clearly, I think it's going to go to something 3 to 4 times that cost as the technology and the detection levels are improved, and we have to shift entirely into reverse osmosis. And then you have to deal with what you're going to do with the millions of gallons a day of hazardous waste, which are part of the brine and the reverse osmosis process. So this is a moving target, extraordinary unknowns, and exceptional cost. We're flying blind. We're in a clouded environment. Thank you.
So for the current 6-MGD treatment facility, we did evaluate that, and eventually the 6-MGD would be required to remove PFAS on the discharge side of the reverse osmosis eventually if district ends up going with a reverse osmosis process. So this is a no regret investment for the district to proceed with the 6-MGD at this time. So that was our initial analysis before we did the financial analysis and then understood the impact of the 6-MGD design at this point.
Okay. And I'm glad this has been looked at in greater detail. When it first came to the board and was approved, it was an issue to both approve the study and the contract to start this work, the $6 million contract, the $17 million contract. So we now have taken a step back and looking at even more some of the complexities. And hopefully we're open-minded enough as we go through the study that we're prepared to make adjustments as necessary and recognize that this could well be over $100 million, at 4 to 5 times the 37 million, that we'd be looking at something easily in excess of $150 million, which is a major portion of our capital expenditure. We'll double it.
You have a zero-cost solution?
You know, this is being generated by the use of groundwater and the need to adapt our groundwater reservoir, which is important, but recognize the source. And then we have to do more detailed studies as to where the fluorine is coming from, which is causing the problem with the organic fluorine. So there may well be some options to reduce the source component, as well as taking a look at our water supply, because there are areas of the groundwater basin that have no detectable levels of PFAS. So yes, there may well be a no-cost solution. Thank you.
I am just going to say, be very careful talking about using, I assume you're implying using our deep aquifer where we do not currently have PFAS detection to dilute or blend with the shallower groundwater that has PFAS detection. Just
And it may
remember,
be, and it may well be the contingency water
And
supply
I
that we
am
go
just-
to when we lose our
I'm just going to
imported
say,
water supplies.
just be very careful doing that because all our groundwater basins are actually connected in Niles Cone.
Oh.
So when you start drawing the deep water aquifer, it is entirely possible that we'll end up contaminating the aquifer.
Yeah, on that note, just so the board isn't surprised later,
Okay?
we're looking at all kinds of pathways to ensure that we're going to be able to meet regulatory requirements and understanding that we're going to have PFAS treatment available essentially at the wellhead, right? We are looking at options, including more deep aquifer wells to supply the blender with the full understanding that they are connected and that we don't have a great way of predicting how long the PFAS will take before it arrives in the deep aquifer, but sort of understanding that ultimately it's going to be there. These compounds are the so-called forever chemicals. They will be migrating in the ground, and they're ultimately going to show up at the deep aquifer. But just so the board's not surprised later when we potentially come back to the board with some additional thinking about more wells, which, by the way, we have in our planning anyway. It's a matter of, do we need to slot these in a little bit earlier in order to help deal with the uncertainties and the constraints from a production standpoint?
And be thankful we don't have recycled water, because we've seen the de novo creation of PFAS, particularly in recycled water. Thank you.
Okay, let me say a few words here. I feel like we're going way down into the technical weeds. We're addressing the community here, and I think that most members of the community hardly understand any of the technical discussion that we're having. So I want to speak at a very high level. What is the purpose of what we're trying to achieve for the community? We're trying to ensure the best water quality that we can deliver. That's part of our mission statement. 10 years ago, I don't even recall, even hearing about PFAS and PFOS. We didn't even see it raised in aqua and industry conferences until maybe 3-4 years ago. And around 2 years ago, we started talking more seriously about how we can address these issues. What are the legal risks? Who's doing what in the rest of the whole water industry? We're not singularly affected by this. This is the whole water industry across the country. And that's why I've articulated in the past that I believe at some point the state government, the federal government have to come in if there's any restitution toward the manufacturers themselves cannot take on all of this burden, even if they're the ones responsible. Otherwise, we would be bankrupting many important companies around the world. So at a very high level for the community, I asked myself, what am I trying to achieve for folks out there? And the way I view it is that we're trying to clean up our water at the most reasonable cost that we can. This was totally unexpected, these costs in our CIP 2 years ago, 4 years ago. And so I'm looking for the most reasonable solution that cleans up our groundwater. Our Hetch Hetchy water's not affected, which is 20% of our water. The imported water from Lake Oroville is not affected either. So we're simply trying to clean up our groundwater. And that's the remaining 40% or so. And so I'm supportive of the staff recommendations here because I think this is, after all the discussions we've had, this is the lowest cost, most reasonable solution to attacking the problem and ensuring the highest level of water quality that we can for our community with the least amount of ill health effects to anyone out there. So people still have the choice to go to some type of water purification system in their home on top of what we deliver. But, you know, I think we can be proud of the fact that, you know, we are delivering very high-quality water today. I don't want to scare anybody that we're delivering bad water or that they're at cancer risk or anything like that. So I would like to see us, as a board, support the direction of engineering right now, move expeditiously, and inform the community that, you know, this is becoming more of, the public is becoming more aware of these issues, and that we, as an agency, as a board, as a staff, we are proactively trying to deal with this situation in the most responsible way that we can. Because when you have these type of expenses suddenly showing up out of the blue in our CIP, it can't but help affect our water rates at some point. So education is a very important part of what we have to do right now, too, with the community. So I'll leave it at that.
Director Huang, do you have any?
Thank you, Director Sethy, for bringing us back. That totally summarizes it. I totally agree with it. Our water, just for the community, for our customers, our water is safe to drink. We currently meet all drinking water standards. This project is ACWD's way to proactively address potential future change in regulation. And this is, the project as is right now, is the most cost-effective way for us to achieve that. And it also has enough nimbleness built in there that we could reevaluate at midpoint if we need to change our strategy. So I definitely support this project, and thank you, Director Sethy, for bringing us back to this higher level.
Director Akbari, did you have any comment?
Nothing at this time. Thank you.
Okay. I would note that, I would argue that this is not a solution. It's an interim fix. It's trying to meet a moving target. If we were to do more of a solution, we'd be looking at reverse osmosis at 4 times the cost and at the full 15 MGD, which at 4 times that would be $170 million, about $2,000 per customer. And even that may not achieve all the objectives and requirements that we need, because we still have to then deal with the waste. We're at a point where I would we're being asked to help fund a study, and I would encourage us to look at fingerprinting and getting as much information as we can on the actual contaminants that are there. That will help us in our legal issues. But recognize this is going to be coming back, and we'll be looking, and I would hope when it does that we will have looked at our integrated resources plan to see for less cost if we could desalinate the San Francisco Bay as opposed to using a contaminated groundwater basin. That is the level of cost we're running into with this parts per trillion for small fractions of a parts per quadrillion, 0.0004 parts per trillion. That is beyond, and many orders of magnitude beyond what we've ever considered in the past. If that becomes a regulatory driver, our traditional water supply may no longer be viable.
Yeah, and just a quick note that our integrated resources planning process, as you know, we've got an upcoming workshop. Ms. Heides will talk a little bit more about that coming up. And we are going to be, well, we have already started the process, but we're going to start a process with the board later this month. Water quality is always one of the factors that are involved in water supplies. So, so we've got a long way to go, but we are starting that process. So it's not as though, you know, the full range of options won't be evaluated.
I really worry when it's stated in a public meeting that we have a contaminated groundwater system. I think that word is can be misunderstood, misconstrued in so many ways. It's just misleading to the public. We're talking about, parts per billion of some trace things that are in the water supply.
It's actually parts per trillion, well
Yeah.
below parts per billion.
Yeah.
And it's a regulatory
So,
issue that's been identified.
I don't want this public board to scare our community by suggesting we have a contaminated groundwater system. This is the groundwater system that this community's lived with for 108 years.
Well, it's
There's
the-
no state or federal agency that's coming down, beating down on the water district, saying you have a contaminated supply of water.
have a $37 million
We are
project.
thoughtfully trying to consider where regulations are headed in the future and how we can deliver an even higher quality of level of water than we're currently delivering. And so I think
It is,
seriously misleading, and I say this as my friendly colleague. Please,
they've established a minimum contaminant level of 3 parts per trillion.
No, that's,
Well,
There is
it's
no
actually, well,
MCL.
that's not the MCL.
That's the notification level. Well,
That's
actually,
a
the
health-
measurement level is
that's
3
the health
parts.
advisory level.
And the MCL is a little bit higher, 20?
The
There's no
future
MCL.
notification is, the proposed level is 3 parts per million, but 3 parts per trillion, I'm sorry. But that's not the current notification level. And there is
And the
no
level of-
MCL established at
And
this
the level of
time.
concern was 0.0004 parts per trillion. So, on one of the components. And it is called a contaminant. So that is the reality. That's why we're spending this much money chasing it and trying to deal with it. And we're not,
Director Weed, this is like, we've seen the examples before. This is like one molecule in the size of an Olympic-sized swimming pool.
I'm in full agreement with that. And I will tell you that the cost can be, and this is only one of several black swans coming down in the area of water quality. We have microplastics, and we have pharmaceuticals and hormones,
So-
which will be following that.
If I may, I think we're straying a little bit. I'm just going to say factually, we have to agree that we currently, ACWD's water is safe to drink. We meet all drinking water levels. It's also a statement of fact that EPA has adopted, for lack of a better word, health advisories that's very low, which is causing President Wee some concern. But that's looped back to what we're doing today for this agenda item, which is to build a treatment plant.
And so that health advisory and the related MCLs are also what
And
is
I-
driving this proposal
I
before
think
us.
we have very different opinions.
I'm going to
At
call
the
the question here and move
And that-
to recommend approval of the staff recommendation on item 5.6.
Thank you.
I don't see any hands up for members of the public, but it's probably good to just check before taking action.
See, I have one hand up now.
I'm just moving the item.
Whose hand is up?
Mr.
Mr.
Nishimura.
Nishimura? Why don't you make your comment, Mr. Nishimura, and then we'll take the motion.
Yeah, so I just wanted to chime in on the concern that we're scaring the public, right? I would be concerned if the district were avoiding the question because they are worried about scaring the public, right? I mean, I am appalled sometimes at the lack of scientific knowledge of the general public, but the public deserves to know, right? So if the government agency is saying that this is a contaminant of concern, it is a legitimate question for members of the public to say, well, has this contaminant been detected in my water? If so, what's going on? Right, so to say that we're worried about scaring the public because we're using the word contaminant, well, I mean, that's what it is, right? And I would be very concerned if the board started taking actions to hide or sweep things under the rug, right? I mean, I agree that the levels are very low. As somebody who is pretty trained in the scientific area, am also quite surprised at the reported health effects at the levels that they're talking about. But it is what it is, and And I would strongly encourage the board to be open and transparent about these things rather than worrying about scaring us. Because I would be very afraid of a board that wasn't open and transparent. That's all. Thank you.
And
Mr.
if I may-
Nishimura, if those comments were directed toward what I said, I fully support what you're saying. I want to be transparent. But let's be realistic. When you talk about a contaminated water supply, and you may have representatives of the press covering a meeting like this, whether now or whether now or on a recorded basis later on, people can draw different inferences from the language that is used. And I want to be very careful about the use of that language and properly, as best we can, express to the community what we're doing, what the contaminant level is, and assure the community that we do have, as far as we know, a good supply of water that we're delivering. We're looking at changing regulations over time and how to deal with it. I appreciate your comments, but I think we're more in agreement than you would realize.
And if I may, I think just along those lines, that's been the district's approach this whole episode with PFAS. We have been very transparent with the board and with the public. We have on our website a separate web page on this topic, acwd.org/PFAS. And on that website is the information that we have about concentrations we're measuring, about our approach on this topic in a public-friendly way. So that has been our approach all along.
All right, well, I moved for approval of this item 5.6 on the agenda. Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right, thank you. Discussion on the motion, I would ask that, because I'm sure it will pass, that you evaluate your proposed study, go beyond the 18 compounds that were identified. Look at the total organic fluorines and anything else that may be popping up, and also more particularly the short chain and long chain effectiveness of or impact when you try to use ion exchange. And will the ion exchange work well with short chain organic fluorine? So, thank you. We have Mr. Akbari, did you have any additional comments? All right. Let me call for the question, please. Been moved and seconded.
Okay. Director Sethy?
Aye.
Akbari?
Aye.
Gunther? Huang?
Aye.
And Weed?
Aye. All right, thank you. All right, let us take a break. We will try to get back by 8 o'clock, and it'll be a...
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you. Welcome back to the Alameda County Water District Board meeting.
He's back now.
Oh, he's, okay.
13 October, and remarkably close to 8 o'clock. So we next have item 5.7, an authorization to execute amendments to power purchase agreements for clean energy program.
Yeah, and it's been a while since the board has seen much on this program, so we're happy to bring it back and share the way forward. So I'll start off, though, with Mr. Awoke kicking off the item.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Good evening again, board members. In September 2021, the board authorized a clean energy program several years ago. The board approved a contract, an agreement with DG West One LLC, but that was based on a program the board approved several years ago. We are, as a district, committed to clean energy and sustainability. Since then, there's been some changes to the solar energy market, as you may have heard, and other economic factors have contributed to the changes in the market, and that has necessitated revisiting the pricing arrangement for the project. Today, we have our project manager, Mr. Carlos Sempre, to provide a brief presentation. We also have Mr. Brett Johnson. He's a principal with Sage Energy, our consultant on the project. He will also help answer any questions you may have. Chris Delp, project engineering supervisor, is also in the audience. Thank you.
Please.
All right, hi, everyone. So hoping that compared to PFAS, this is a little ray of sunshine. Next slide, please. Okay, so as you've heard, I'm Carlos, this is Brent. Happy to see everyone here. Next slide, please. So we're here to talk about authorizing amendments for power purchasing agreements for the Clean Energy Program. So what we're going to do is talk about where the project has been, where the state of the industry is. Then we'll go over the details of the proposal that we're discussing and get into our recommendations. Slide. So as Garoom said, about a year ago, we executed 4 power purchasing agreements, PPAs, or sorry, 6, with DG West 1. These are agreements whereby DG West comes in and builds solar panels and associated infrastructure on our property, on our facilities. And then for 25 years, they generate energy, sell it to us at ideally a lower rate than we would be buying power from PG&E at. So 4 of these are what we're calling phase 1. And so those are the ones being discussed today. Essentially what happened was we made it through early design. In January, we got through 30% design. And then at the end of March, there's a court case that triggered the potential for tariffs on solar modules that were likely to have been used on these projects. That threw the industry into turmoil, and our developer notified us that the project wasn't going to work for them under these conditions. And one of the factors here is that unlike construction contracts, PPAs have a finance out clause because they're very heavily financed. So if the developer is unable to get financing for these, then they have a way out. And that's pretty typical for them, and it's why, unlike a construction contract, we can't hold their feet to the fire on it. Next slide, please. So we've been in negotiations with DG West since then. In June, the Biden administration imposed a moratorium on new tariffs, and so that solved one of the problems, which was the potential of large tariffs on those modules.
Could you speak up a little bit, please?
Yes, so some other issues remained, namely supply chain issues with those modules, inflation in construction and materials, and then in interest rates. So in the middle of the summer, we were looking at the potential for prices to increase by about 40%. Since then, there have been changes, there have been negotiations, and currently we're looking at a 22% increase in those PPA rates. What that means is that our 25-year savings would be reduced to $8.25 million, but that's still $8.25 million in net savings. As part of the negotiations, we also managed to pull forward the end of the finance out clause, meaning that at 90% design, the prices would be locked in, and at that point, there's basically a commitment from DG West to build out the projects. The schedule would be extended to the end of 2023, just due to the delays triggered by the tariff court case. And if that goes well, if phase 1 looks like it's moving satisfactorily, then we would move into negotiating phase 2, which would be for Alameda Reservoir and Dakota Reservoir. Next slide, please.
So I'm going to talk a bit about some of the market conditions and constraints on the project. Sounds like we've got some real financial expertise on the board. I think it's no surprise that the cost of money is getting expensive quickly. This goes into the cost of the project for the financing stack that the solar developer relies on to fund the project. So as interest rates continue to rise, that's upward pressure on that PPA price. Capital expenditures, I think you've probably seen this on most of your capital projects. We've seen double-digit inflation on building costs over the last couple of years. That's another big factor in this PPA increase. We do have the bullet there that this may be peaking, and I think a few different indices we've seen out there are kind of starting to level off, like steel. But again, that's crystal ball, but we've seen quite a bit of increase from the time we saw proposals back in 2020 to this point that we're at now, almost 2 years later, or actually 2 years later. I think it was September of 2020 we had our initial proposals in from these vendors. Next slide. So this slide's showing you the price of solar modules over the last several years. As you've seen, we kind of bottomed out in 2020. That was right around when we got our cost proposals in from the vendor. And since then, they've had a steady climb on the cost of the solar modules, one of the major components of their build cost. The other pieces being steel, other electrical, balance of system items, and then of course labor. So in the last couple of years since they did this project, there's been a steady increase on kind of all of their underlying costs, as well as their cost of capital.
May I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Could this be due to the supply constraints that were triggered by the tariff dispute? And so we have high demand, short supply, prices are going up. But that may too also be leveling off as we get more product into the market.
Correct. Yeah, I think there's a couple of macroeconomic things going on here. The tariff issue is a big one. There's a general slowdown in China. China's been a big developer of solar, and the slowing of their economy, I think, is actually freeing up some supply on solar modules. Some of the tariff hiccups, we're kind of getting over that hump, and we're starting to level off. But we're going to mention it in a second here, the Inflation Reduction Act has also kind of spurred a lot of growth in solar, and a lot of the industry is really booming in the U.S. as a result of the Inflation Reduction Act. So I think there's a few different market pressures where it's a little hard. I don't think many developers are going to take the risk that it's going to go down significantly out into the future. But I do think we may see a leveling.
Do we see the same trends like in inverters?
Yeah, inverters haven't had quite as dramatic of an impact on this. I think largely because they weren't subject to that tariff issue, the inverters.
And more U.S. producers too.
There's some U.S. producers. Yeah, it's still primarily Asian on the inverter production.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Next slide. So Inflation Reduction Act, signed back in August of this year. The big news on that was the investment tax credit. So that's what these third-party developers rely on for the tax credits. That was on its way down. It was 26% in this year. It was headed to 22%. The developer that you've contracted with safe harbored their modules at 30%. So they had locked in the 30% investment tax credit, and that was part of that rate you were getting. However, another key items that changed in that Inflation Reduction Act was you're allowed to include more project costs now than you were previously. So the cost of interconnection, your development cost, so essentially all costs to bring that project to bear can now claim that 30% ITC. And that was part of our negotiations when they first threw that larger number at us back in the spring. And the IRA was signed back in August. We kind of leaned back on NextEra, and that was one of the main ways we were able to push back on that price and get that price lowered from their initial, what did you say, Carlos, 40?
At one point, 40%.
At one point it was 40%. We're down to 22% increase. So this was one of the factors that we were able to negotiate that back down. Next slide. So a couple other kind of key pieces to this project are the tariffs that you're going to interconnect with the utility under. And there's 3 separate tariffs that we're dealing with here. These are utility tariffs, not the tariffs on the panels. Confusing thing in the energy world. So the first one is here at the headquarters. We're going to be connecting under a net energy metering agreement with PG&E, and that largely dictates the value of energy when you push solar energy back onto the grid. So when you're not consuming everything that you're producing, it goes back on the grid, and you're given a certain value for that energy. We've locked in the headquarters under net energy metering 2.0. That's the current regime in California in PG&E territory. There's an expectation that's going to move to a new net energy metering regime that's going to be less valuable for solar. So we're locked in right now, and our recommendation would be to stay locked in on that tariff. If you were to kind of extend the time frame of this project or switch vendors, you would add more risk at being able to stay grandfathered on that NEM 2 regime, which is a 20-year grandfathering. And most projects that we're modeling, there's about a 15 to 20 to 25% loss in value from NEM 2 to NEM 3. So fair bit of savings change if you were to go down to NEM 3. And PG&E, that grandfathering, we've secured your place in line, and after 2 years, PG&E could come back and cancel that, basically that lock that you have on NEM 2. So that's one reason to kind of keep this moving. So the Newark desal facility, we would be looking at a non-export tariff there because there's so much energy consumed at that site. We don't have enough footprint to really put a significant amount of solar there. So you're basically going to consume all of that solar on site. It'd be very unlikely for you to push back out onto the grid. So not much risk on that site around tariff. But next slide. This is probably where your most risk and the most kind of urgency is on this project is under the RES BCT tariff with PG&E. And this is the tariff where we can generate on one site and send credits out to the other sites. And this tariff has a cap, a certain number of megawatts that can be developed in PG&E territory. Currently, about 50% of those are used up. There's actually, projects are built and taking advantage of the tariff. The remaining capacity under this tariff is in development, which is a full spectrum of somebody submitted an application to they're constructed, but they haven't received permission to operate yet. You're in that 50% bucket right now. So we have reservations under RES BCT, and much of the value of this project relies on this tariff. I think that's it for this slide. So, next slide. Or any questions actually on the PG&E tariffs? Okay. Next slide.
Okay, so here's a summary of our 4 Phase 1 sites and what the changes have been in PPA pricing. Blended average, we're looking at an increase from $85 per megawatt hour to $103.60. And Sage helped us perform an analysis, and that's where these numbers of 25-year savings come from. The numbers assume that PG&E rates are going to increase an average of 3% a year. So obviously that $8.25 million will change based on what PG&E does. If rates increase at a faster than 3%, we save more money. If they stay flat for 25 years, theoretically, we would still save about $3 million after that 25-year period. So there's very little risk of PG&E rates affecting us negatively. Next slide, please. So just to go over each of the Phase 1 sites real quick, Whitfield Reservoir is by far the biggest, 70% of Phase 1. In terms of the site, you can see to the left, there's a kind of a rectangle, and that's the reservoir itself. It's underground, so above it, we would be building solar panels, and then we would be putting panels on the ground in the field adjacent to it. That site is currently open field, tall grass. It's not productive, and this is an opportunity to do something with it. As you can see, RES-BCT would allow us to build about 5 times more capacity than if we didn't have it. If we didn't, then we would be building just enough to feed the booster station on site. And like I said, that would be about 1/5 of the total number that we plan to build. Next, please. So here at headquarters, we have existing solar panels on some of our vehicle carports. Those are the 2 narrow strips up top on that image. The larger sets of panels would be new over our spoils bins and over our equipment racks. As we said, this would be power that we would use most of, but after hours and weekends, we would be pushing some of that off-site through NEM 2.0. Next slide. So at Mayhew, this is about 10% of phase 1. It's 2/3 the size of the headquarters project. The savings are substantially less under the assumed 3% annual rate increase in PG&E prices. It's basically a more expensive site to build on. But if PG&E rate increases exceed 3%, then we have the potential for the savings to increase quite a bit more than what we're showing here. Nevertheless, it is a fairly sizable project in terms of energy and carbon offset. I believe it's about 2.5% of our power, at least. And like Whitfield, it's highly dependent on RES-BCT.
May I ask a question? When you do your financial analysis on the net present value of the savings, are you factoring in rate increases from PG&E over time?
Yes, 3% a year.
That's what we've seen in a long-term average, 40-year average. But in the recent couple of years, we've seen much more dramatic raises.
Mm-hmm.
But we're using a 3% for a long-term average.
Mm-hmm.
And does that take into account PG&E's proposal to underground their main power lines?
No, I think we consider the 3% conservative. So if with all those costs, transmission distribution costs and other pressures on the utility, if their rates increase more than 3%, your savings will increase beyond what we've shown here.
All right, so desal is interesting in that our power needs there greatly exceed what the roof size can provide. So here, this is essentially a system that takes advantage of the roof space that we do have. Doesn't cost us anything because it pays for itself. And because of the non-export interconnection agreement, it's a fairly simple connection that allows us maximum flexibility for future alternative systems. And of course, this is a very publicly visible facility. We have tours there. It's one of our newer, kind of nicer showpieces. So that's honestly one of the reasons why we want to put solar modules on there. Next slide. So between our consultant, Sage, our developer, DG West, and the district, we've been doing our best to navigate these interesting times. And the bottom line is that we are able to save $8.25 million over 25 years and more than 12,000 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions. One of the advantages to solar power is that the capital outlay is done by the developer. So that makes it a little easier for us to fit this into our capital improvements project program. And we do believe that this is the best deal out there right now. Comparing the revised proposal from DG West to the proposals we received in 2021, it's still lower than all the others. So we do think that this is reasonable and appropriate for the market and worth moving forward with. We are committed to being good stewards of the environment, and to that end, offsetting 25% of the district's energy use through RSBCT is something that we're very much looking forward to. And PG&E rates, we don't want to predict where they're going to go. We're not soothsayers, but by providing a reliable and steady pricing for this amount of energy, we think we make our financials just a little safer to deal with. Next slide, please. Now, our big question to our developer has obviously been, what can we do to prevent this from happening again? Who knows what's going to happen in geopolitics? We'd like to go through this once, be done with it, and move forward. To that end, they are moving forward. They're locking in of prices. Essentially, the solar industry is, what we understand is that they're changing the way they procure. And that's reflected in moving that finance out clause up to design stages. In addition, we've performed all of the preliminary design for these 4 sites, so we don't expect any major surprises on our end. As for timing, one of the reasons we want to move forward with solar energy as part of the clean energy program before other forms of energy is that these RESBCT and NEM 2.0 programs are short-lived opportunities that we want to take advantage of. And finally, interest rates. Clearly, it looks like they're headed upward. And that this being a heavily financed form heavily financed project, this seems like as good a time as any to get into it. Finally, we're not closing any doors on future forms of energy. The funding that this will open up and the associated electrical infrastructure upgrades will allow us to pursue other alternatives, especially at DCEL, which is one of our major energy users, and potentially at the future PFAS treatment plant as well. With that, I think we recommend that by motion we authorize execution of the amendments to the power purchase agreements for Phase 1 at Headquarters, Mayhew Reservoir, Newark Desalination Facility, and Whitfield Reservoir for the Clean Energy Program, Job 10093, with DG West 1 LLC, an indirect wholly owned subsidiary of NextEra Energy Resources LLC. And now I'm happy to take any questions.
All right, first, is there any comment from members of the public? No hands raised. Dr. Akbari, did you have any comment?
So this item has been coming to the committee, so I can't say that I'm surprised that the equation has changed on the cost-benefit analysis. I still think it pencils out for us, and so still supportive of the program overall. And I appreciate staff's work to keep us updated. Thank you.
Dr. Huang?
Nothing from me.
Sethy?
Well, I was the one who first kicked off trying to have a clean energy program 4 years ago with a set of workshops. So I'm encouraged to see that we got back on track. A little disappointed that we had the tariffs issue because it really interrupted things right when interest rates were at rock bottom. So a little bit of missed timing there, but nevertheless, some good savings here. I do want us to move forward expeditiously, as fast as we can, especially on the Whitfield portion of the project, because that's where we get the biggest payback. You know, if we can capture those energy programs from PG&E and et cetera. I would still encourage us, you know, over the horizon to keep looking at a solution like Bloom Energy for the desal plant, because we could create substantial savings there if we can just break even on our energy consumption. I do have one question, because being familiar with the photovoltaics market, you see the efficiency of panels going up almost every year. And so I'm wondering, from the first time we were looking at how much energy we could generate on site per panel, has it gone up so we can have more efficient panels now, even over a 2-year period, and generate more electricity than we were planning?
So in a couple of years, we've probably seen the efficiency standard increase maybe 5% on solar modules in the last couple of years, as to like the standard module that you would put in a commercial application like this. NextEra was putting forward some safe harbored modules that they had bought back during the 30% ITC, so they're even a couple years older. So, you know, maybe we've gained 7% since they first proposed, or since the modules they were using that were a few years older than the ones that they're proposing now.
But we're pretty much using state-of-the-art.
We
right
are,
now.
yeah. And do you know what the most recent proposal, have they given us a module yet on the most recent?
I don't believe so.
Yeah, so they're going to buy whatever they can get on the market right now, which I would think would be in the 20 to 21% efficiency range. The kind of upper end of the market right now is around 22 and a half for commercial.
Well, if, based on the CPI results today and where the Fed may go in further increasing interest rates, I think the great fear around the world is triggering a worldwide recession. And even the International Monetary Fund is warning about that, and World Bank. I am partial to agreeing that we probably will enter into a recession at some point. We're seeing the early indicators right now just in the Bay Area in terms of layoffs and high tech. I know from the venture capital side of things, everybody's being told no more hiring, freeze everything. It's not necessarily lay off people, but freeze. Wait until we see where things go. So if we do go into recession, I'm thinking ahead, I could foresee that the 50% of the projects that are out there that are in the cycle right now, some of those may be put on hold just for economic reasons. So it becomes even more incumbent upon us to move as fast as we can, because 75% of our benefit is tied up in that 50% of the projects that are out there. So the one question I would have for you is, if we assume we give the approval tonight, when would we see completion of, let's say, the Whitfield Reservoir, first of all?
So we're still working on the schedule. We have an overall completion date of late 2023 for all of the sites, but Whitfield, as our priority, would come online a few months before the end of the year, I believe.
Before the end of?
2023.
Mm-hmm. When would we start the work?
So we would start 60% design right away.
No, I mean actual shovels to the ground out in the field.
I think spring.
That would be my guess. Is a project like this, you know, from the time they break ground to the time you have an operational system, it's probably 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the actual construction will go pretty quickly once it's moving, but all the commissioning and startup and that can drag on, and we've got some service upgrades to work on as well.
And as far as the other projects go,
would you be looking for completion out in 2024?
Not for phase one. I think phase one, we expect to complete before the end of 2023.
Okay, good. So let's move this thing forward.
Okay.
Go, baby, go.
Now, my comments. Fundamental concern I've had with solar is we've yet to reach grid parity. The net is cheaper than solar. And the only way that makes solar potentially viable is some of the incentives and cost breaks, et cetera. The next, and we're looking at 25 years to try and determine where those subsidies and assurances are going to be. The more we can transfer it on to the developer for risk, the better off we are, and hopefully we've done that. The next is that there's no economic value to solar power for much of the day due to the duck curve. We've produced so much solar that for much of the time that we're producing it, there's no secondary market. We have to pay a load of nearby states to take our power. It has negative value. So from a purely abstract point, solar doesn't work. It needs all these subsidies and other programs to be put in for whatever reason they're being put in. We're looking at hopefully the regeneration of nuclear power, which blows all these numbers off the table, and becomes a very inexpensive power. The tariff issue exists. It was a political decision to ignore the fact that that they're circumventing the law, manufacturing the panels in China and relabeling them in South Asian countries and then shipping them to us. But that hasn't gone away. That is the reality. We're choosing to ignore the law, a presidential edict. And from my major concern with ACWD is that we have not, in our planning, looked at operational security and reliability. Excuse me, in a contingency environment. We need a 24/7 reliable power that when the grid goes down, we can continue to operate our facilities, particularly facilities such as the Newark desalination plant. Solar doesn't address that. It came up last time I asked about natural gas. The consultant said we had used a number of 14 cents per kilowatt hour. I had a call from Bloom that needs to be verified that they were, depending on the program, from 9 cents to 11 cents, would have made it very competitive with your solar programs. And that's 24/7 energy. So while we may make a few bucks, and it may be a nice thing to put on a campaign statement that we're going clean energy, at what cost? And what lost opportunity to develop that operational security that if we did have a contingency, we could continue to operate. We should be pricing in are batteries. Solar can work with batteries and you'll get 24/7 power. But those costs are not in these equations. So this is charging ahead, but I'm not prepared at this point I'll probably abstain on the issue because I think we need to do further evaluation.
I'd like to respond just quickly because Director Weed and I have had these friendly debates going on for quite a while. But John is expressing one philosophical point of view. And the opposite side is where I come from as a citizen living in our community on planet Earth. And that is that, and I come from a business and economics background in college. So I look at the cost-benefit analysis a different way. That I, as a citizen, am willing to pay the higher cost of solar and wind versus natural gas and coal and other things, because I want a cleaner planet. So as a society, I think we have come to terms with this, that as a society, we are willing to pay a higher cost for a cleaner world. So I'm a real proponent of continuing this clean energy program by looking at good battery technologies. I happen to be working with one of the startups right here in Fremont that is working on advanced battery technology right now. And so these solutions are coming down the pike. We know that they are. So that's why when I look at the net present value savings that we will have here, I view this as the conservative side of what our savings could potentially be once we put in proper battery technology. If we can put in Bloom Energy units over at the desal plant, we're taking the first steps toward what will probably be a multi-year effort at increasing the energy efficiency of the district. And by the way, we're in the water industry too, and hydro is very efficient, you know. So, and we're running our TP2, you know, essentially on hydropower that we self-generate. So that's another nice feature in our system. Thank you.
And thank you. Any other comments? Members of the board, I see no hands up. So do we have a motion?
I'll make the motion.
I'll second.
I'll give it to Director Akbari.
Director Akbari made the second
Yeah.
to approve the staff recommendation. It's always best to say what the motion is for. And
Thank you for seconding for me.
roll call, please.
Director Sethy,
Aye.
Akbari,
Aye.
Gunther, Huang,
Aye.
and Weed.
Abstain.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Wow,
Next,
it's
move
been a
on.
while since we've had a
Thank you.
3-0-1
That's an odd
vote.
one.
Yeah, I mean, just, but it feels good. May not make economic sense, but boy, it feels good. Tell that to the ratepayers. Let's see.
I'm sure they will agree with me.
They may. The 5.7, authorization to execute amendments.
This is actually
Oh,
5.8 now.
I'm
yeah.
sorry, let me skip that. 5.8 is an authorization to implement certain COVID-19 related temporary employee benefits provided by Assembly Bill 152 with certain district-provided enhancements.
That's right, and this item will be handled by our Director of Finance and Administration, John Wunderlich.
Great, thank you, Mr. Stevenson. So this item essentially continues, or what's being proposed here is to continue the same policies have been approved for prior versions of supplemental paid sick leave benefits. And so I'll just run through the summary here. AB 152 was a budget trailer bill which took effect last month. And what that did is it extended the provisions of SB 114, which were due to sunset at the end of September. And so all it does is extend those benefits. It didn't add any new benefits. And so those benefits provided under SB 114 included 80 hours of supplemental paid sick leave for COVID-related needs. And that was 40 hours that was more flexible related to COVID issues, and then 40 hours that required proof of a positive COVID test, either for the employee or a family member they were caring for. And so instead of those 80 hours expiring September 30th, they've now been extended until December 31st. For the supplemental paid sick leave benefits provided under SB 114, the district did choose to make certain enhancements, and those enhancements specifically included paying for those leave hours at the employee's full rate of pay, as opposed to caps that were included in the legislation, as well as to avoid a use it or lose it scenario, allowing unused hours to convert to regular sick leave at the end of the benefit period. And for these hours, that only applies to the more flexible 40 hours. It does not apply to the second 40-hour bucket, which requires confirmation of a positive test result. And so approval of this item will help achieve district strategic plan goal for improve workforce recruitment, maintain retention, and enhance employee engagement. And so the recommendation is by motion, authorize the general manager to extend and implement certain enhancements to the supplemental paid sick leave benefits provided under AB 152, which is just an extension of those previously provided under SB 114, consistent with enhancements provided for prior COVID-related supplemental sick leaves. And so with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any comment? I see no members of the public. Dr. Akbari, did you have any comment or question?
No questions or comment from my end.
All right, thank you. So do we have a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Second.
Moved and seconded. I see no hands up. So roll call, please.
Director Sethy,
Aye.
Akbari,
Aye.
Gunther, Huang,
Aye.
and Weed.
Aye. All right, then we can next move to the reports, which are board committee reports first. Is there any comment or questions people have on any of the five board committee reports? And then let us then move on to the operational reports. Ask the staff if there's any of the operational reports you feel need to bring brought to our attention.
Well, staff stands ready to answer any questions about any of the reports in the packet.
Questions for me?
No questions? No. Move on. Staff presentations, we have a drought update, which is 6.3.2.
That's right. You may recall the water year 22 has ended, and now we're in the beginning of water year 23, and we told the board previously that we planned on bringing a little bit more of an outlook to the beginning of water year 23 to the full board. So I think maybe I'll just ask Laura Heides to get us started on this item.
Great, thank you. Well, we've been bringing some regular board updates on the drought that have been fairly short over the summer with not a lot of new news, but with fall approaching, we thought it'd be nice to provide a more thorough update. But we still are awaiting, to see how the weather pans out. But I will turn it over to Leonard Ash, our water supply supervisor, who is here to bring us the latest and greatest on the drought tonight.
All right, thank you, Ms. Heides. Good evening, Mr. President, directors, members of the public. As was mentioned, it's my privilege to provide a little bit of a deeper dive into our drought update this month. As you know, staff has been reporting on a monthly basis to this board on the condition of our drought. I'll start off with some good news. Local rainfall. We did receive 0.53 inches of rain locally in September. And that closes out the water year, which runs from October 1st to the end of September. And as you can see here, we ended the water year at 14.13 inches. And while I'm on this slide, I'll just point out that lower tan-colored band at the bottom kind of shows you the range of dry years. And so this past water year did end up still in that dry year band, but only barely so. I would point out that we did have a couple of very significant atmospheric river events, namely one late in October and one late in December into January, that provided a significant amount of the rainfall we received locally this last water year. Without either of those two events, we would have ended the water year well within a dry year. Next, I'll review statewide conditions. We like to look at the Northern Sierra 8-station index for precipitation. You'll see with the red line, which was also last water year, 21-22, for the Northern California region, you see a very similar trend, ending the year drier than average, but not too significantly drier. And for a statewide picture of drought conditions, you'll see on the right, the map from the U.S. Drought Monitor shows that 94% of the state is currently in a severe drought or greater. And that reflects in our reservoir conditions statewide. As of today, Oroville Reservoir is 34% full, which is 64% of average for this time of year, while San Luis Reservoir is 27% full, which is 62% of average for this time of year. It's not shown on this graphic, but I heard today from San Francisco that Hetch Hetchy Reservoir is 77% full, Calaveras 60% full. And then the graph that you see on the right gives you a closer snapshot of Lake Oroville storage conditions. That red line is for water year 21, and you can see that during that water year, their storage levels did decrease. And then that thin blue line is last water year, 2022, and we did see storage conditions improve. So we're starting this current water year with storage conditions in Oroville more favorable than they were at this point last year. For our water supply updates, you've been seeing this slide for several months now. There really are no real changes to this graph, but it's just a snapshot of where we currently stand with our water supply portfolio. And we continue to manage our local supplies judiciously. For demand tracking, another array of very good news on this slide. You can see the customers' 2020 demands are in orange, 2021 demands are in red, and the dashed purple line is our conservation targets under our current drought declaration. And you can see with the blue line that our customers have responded. And for those very high demand summer months, our customers have been able to reduce their demands to the target levels that we were asking for through the demand reduction actions that we've identified. So that's really to the credit of our customers and their ability to receive that messaging and implement it in their daily practice. So we're very pleased to show that for especially those high summer months that we are right on target where we need to be. We did have a bit of a slower start to the year. And as you recall, we had some very dry months early in the calendar year. So it did take a little while to get up to where we wanted to be as far as the water use reductions from our customers. And we hope that those actions do persist as we finish out the calendar year.
I'll make a quick note that at 40 MGD maximum production requirements, we will be able to reduce our operations requirements and need for the groundwater reservoir. We have about 90 MGD capacity, as I recall, and we're running at well less than half of our capacity.
With this next slide, I do want to highlight our water use efficiency activity from our water use efficiency staff. We continue to see that customer interactions do remain very robust, with continued strength in the sectors of receiving water waste reports, as well as fielding calls and emails to our hotline. So that continues to indicate that our customers remain very engaged in ensuring that the community continues to support those demand reduction actions. As for our public affairs staff and the efforts for public outreach, I do want to highlight a mix of both district staffed events as well as district supported events. And so you see from the photo here from the Newark Days Parade and the Information Fair in September, where we had quite a significant district presence, and then the district supported event for the Science in the Park earlier this month. And then for some upcoming events that the district will participate in directly are the landscape workshops, as well as the Union City Family Center Resource Fair. And district-supported events include the City of Fremont Public Safety Fair on October 8th and continued distribution of materials and other other consumables that our customers can pick up at these various public events. And then as for messaging, we continue to stress, especially now that we've entered into October, we have a reduction now in the number of irrigation days that are permitted every week, down to 1 day a week. And so we've been distributing that message both on our website as well as advertisements in the Tri-City Voice, and then also on radio announcements. Now, I do want to look ahead because we are entering a new water year and we want to see what things are looking like. The precipitation outlook right now, based on the current modeling and as far as we can project with some accuracy or some level of confidence, we do expect that we will have a third La Nina year as we head into winter. So 91% chance of La Nina conditions persisting from September to November. As of today, the National Weather Service is reporting 75% likelihood that La Nina conditions will persist from December through February, and then reducing to a 54% chance that conditions will turn more neutral somewhere in the February to April range. And so you may have heard in the news media, and our state climatologist likes to refer to this as the triple dip. That sounds great if you're at an ice cream parlor, but for water supply, that's not as welcoming. So third La Nina year, we've only had 2 prior incidences of this since meteorologists have been tracking this in the 50s. We had one in the 70s and one in the late 90s into early 2001. And those last 2 instances, that third La Nina year has typically been dry. Now, we like to stress that La Nina years are not necessarily dry, and that's that second bullet point that we like to emphasize, that La Nina years are mostly known for their variability. And that'll typically depend on the timing and magnitude of atmospheric river events for us. And so if you look at the map that's on the right, you can see for the seasonal precipitation outlook, this is October through December, they expect that a greater increase for above normal precipitation, an increased probability of that for the Pacific Northwest. And then if you look towards the southwest of the U.S., Southern California, Arizona area, you start to see increased probabilities for below normal precipitation. So you can kind of see those 2 extremes, and our water supply is reliant on something that's right in the middle. So we're fortunately still in that coin toss. It could be wet, it could be dry, we just don't know yet. So please stay tuned. And then how that affects our water supply and planning efforts, it's our business to be pessimistic. And so when we look at our water supply portfolio and try to anticipate for a 50-50 chance what might happen, of course, we're going to plan for the worst. So our water supply assumptions for the coming calendar year, we're looking at state water project, at least initially having a very low, potentially a 0 Table A allocation. So that's an allocation of new water supplies in addition to the district's state water project supplies that we already have in storage. However, we continue to receive assurances from the Department of Water Resources that they intend to provide deliveries to the district of those waters we do have stored. So we do expect to utilize stored water and receive deliveries thanks to our semi-tropic banking, as well as the supplies we have in storage at San Luis Reservoir and carryover. Director Weed?
The San Francisco PUC, they remove the minimum purchase requirement. We can purchase less than the minimum purchase requirement.
That's correct, yes. Because of the water shortage declaration from the SFPUC, we are waived from that minimum purchase requirement, yes.
And the state review of this, of the semi-tropic Sigma proposal, when do we expect that to be issued?
I'm sorry, I don't have that information readily available, but I can look into that and get back to you.
And should the state curtail might we run into some issues?
If the state curtails?
Curtailed overdrafting of the semi-tropic.
That's a hypothetical. I don't think I want to speculate on that until I look into that further.
One of the concerns is Semi-Tropic is proposing to continue overdrafts to 2040.
So we do have contractual obligations with our semi-tropic contract. They're under obligation to provide us water that we have in storage. So right now, we have no indication that they would not be able to provide the water that they're contractually obligated to provide to us.
Their obligation then is to provide us water, as I understand. But if they can't do it from their storage, you would have to find another source to provide that water to us.
I would assume so, but that's been unprecedented.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So then for our next source of supply, 20% imported water from the San Francisco Regional Water System. And so for planning purposes, we're assuming that that current sort of 11% system-wide reduction that they have through their emergency action will persist for the following calendar year. And then for local supplies, we continue to actively manage based on what local precipitation we do receive. We have done some modeling for the future calendar year, looking at sort of worst-case years, 1924, where we received about 8 inches of local rainfall, just to look and just to see how that might affect our groundwater conditions. Because of our healthy state water project storage and the water that we have pre-staged at San Luis Reservoir, bringing in about 5,000 acre feet to augment our groundwater recharge, we expect only a modest decrease in our groundwater levels at the end of the calendar year if it were significantly dry in 2023. And so that just highlights the groundwater benefits from having that diverse water supply portfolio.
Over the last Christmas season or week, DWR was able to operate Del Val at 18,000 acre feet above the projected curves that the Corps of Engineers had put in. How do we stand on being able to lock up that 18,000 acre feet that we could split with Zone 7 into our water resource planning?
Yeah, so last year, the Department of Water Resources, which manages Lake Del Val, did seek and did receive a minor deviation request from the Army Corps of Engineers. So that allowed them to basically store water supply storage in the flood control storage portion of the reservoir. And so they chose to exercise some of that, but not the entire volume of that minor deviation, because it had the potential to affect some facilities, as well as just the timing and magnitude of the atmospheric river events that we did receive last year. So the Department of Water Resources is again this year requesting that minor deviation. I don't have word that that's been granted yet, but we would expect that we would support DWR in pursuing that with the Army Corps again this year.
I would note that that 18,000 acre feet, the 9,000 acre feet of ACWD would benefit from is equal to the amount of water we would get from storage from Los Vaqueros LV3 should it ever be built.
So and the storage that we might potentially benefit, whatever volume that would be, obviously is dependent on local precipitation and DWR operations at the time. So it is highly variable. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I'll proceed to the next slide and just talked about supply. Obviously, that's to meet our projected demand, and currently we are. Again, very grateful for our customers for their ability to meet those demand reduction targets that we've set. And so we expect for planning purposes that that 15% conservation request will remain in effect and that our customers will be able to achieve that level of savings. And now, just in summary here, for next year, we expect that dry conditions are likely to persist for a 4th consecutive year. We do have water supply availability and constraints that are very similar to the calendar year we're in right now. So we expect that in all likelihood, conditions will proceed very similar to how they have this year, if it is a 4th consecutive dry year. Again, can't express enough our appreciation of our customers' ability to cut their demands as we've requested, because really it's that lower demand that allows us to stretch our limited water supplies to meet those demands. So really, we are in the position we are this year because of our customers' efforts to achieve that conservation. And then staff will continue to work in reaching out to customers so that they can sustain those conservation levels into the next year. And staff will continue to monitor various actions, especially state actions that might affect our assumptions that I just laid out, and we'll continue to work with the public to keep them engaged on the drought. And with that, I'll be happy to take any questions.
Director Akbari, did you have any comments or questions?
None from my end.
Okay, thank you.
Nothing from me?
Sethy?
Excellent report again.
Thank you for your information. And I just see no hands up from the public, so thank you very much for your.
Okay, thank you.
By the way, Director Weed and I drove by with Mr. Wunderlich past San Luis Reservoir yesterday. We were trying to guess at how full it was. I actually thought it was closer to 40% maybe. So I'm really surprised when you say 27%. But I have a hard time picturing water as it expands out laterally as well as going up in elevation. So, yeah. But I do want to quickly comment. I don't know if either John or John noticed it yesterday, but there were so many green lawns in Los Banos. I was just going, I can't believe this. Why are people watering their lawns out there? It's a desert. And lush green lawns. Unbelievable.
Okay, thank you. All right, then let's move on then to the general manager's reports.
That's right. We do have a few reports this evening. We'll try and keep them brief. We'll start off with a quick description of our upcoming workshop on October 27. Ms. Heides.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. We will be having a workshop focused on October 27th, focused on water supply planning. And we plan to bring to the board at that time some updates on our climate change adaptation work that's been going on, as well as a brief update on our purified water feasibility evaluation study. And then those will wrap into kicking off some of the discussion and background related to our integrated resources planning effort that we're going to be kicking off. So we won't have time to solve all of the problems and questions that I know everybody's anxious to discuss, but we are looking forward very much to kicking that off and kind of setting the stage for future discussions over the course of the next year or so. So we look forward to seeing you then.
All right, next up, we've got some good news to report regarding an award that's recognizing ACWD's IT program, and Mr. Awoke would like to share that.
Thank you, Mr. Stevenson. Good evening again, board members. I am very pleased to inform you that the district was awarded the 2022 Excellence in Technology Practices Award from the Municipal Information Systems Association of America, California, not America. MISAC is as it's known commonly. This is the fourth time the district has received this award, and it's a significant achievement for our IT team. The IT Practices Award is intended to foster and recognize outstanding governance and operation practices in the areas of information technology in local public service organizations such as ours. The award and evaluation process requires the submission of responses to more than 100 questions, lots of questions, that examine an agency's practice across 12 different subject areas, including budgeting, procurement, staffing, operations, finance, and project management, among other things. The district submittal was evaluated by expert IT professionals, people who are in the business and are members of MISAC, and they found it to have met or exceeded best practices in most of these practice areas. So I wanted to take this opportunity to inform the board, but as well as recognize the hard work and dedication of our IT team that helped us win this award. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mr. Awoke. And finally, a couple of notes just on some upcoming outreach activities. There's a lot going on, of course. In addition to those items that Mr. Ash mentioned, we'll be Joining in on Imagine a Day Without Water once again this year. That's Thursday, October 20. And the theme that we're going with this year is no water, no coffee or tea. And so to kind of give you a little heads up as to how that's going to physically manifest itself, we are working with some local coffee shops to distribute these little Java jackets that you have in front of you. And then for folks that are online, we can show them on the screen here. And so it says on the little sticker, no water, no coffee or tea, for our Imagine a Day Without Water. And we're going to have some tables set up, some information tables set up at a couple of coffee shops in the area. One is at Dash Coffee and Bakery at 44047 Osgood. That's from 8:30 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. And then at Mission Coffee Roasting, 7:30 a.m. to 9:30 a.m. And that's on Washington Boulevard, 151 Washington Boulevard. So we're looking forward to engaging with our community and sharing a little bit more information about ACWD's programs as part of this this effort.
What are the dates on those?
That's October 20.
You can
Thursday
take the
the
coffee
20th.
shop near to your home, and I'll take the one near to mine.
Be happy to have you out there, sipping on some coffee and engaging with our customers.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, Union City Family Celebration and Resource Fair is happening on Friday, October 14, tomorrow. That's from 3:30 to 5:30. That's at the family, that's a Union City Resource Center. From 3:30 to 5:30 p.m. We'll be out there. We expect around 500 families to participate in that, so it's a good outreach event and an opportunity for us again to engage with more of our customers. That's at 725 Whipple Avenue in Union City. And then finally, next week, I've been asked to participate in a joint webinar related to the drought, jointly hosted by Aqua, KUA, CMUA, CWA, and the state's Save Our Water campaign. This will be Wednesday next week, October 19 at 3 p.m. My own message as a member of the panel is going to focus on those outreach efforts that we've seen provides a good deal of result for low cost in terms of helping our customers be informed of the drought, the seriousness of the drought, and helping them understand what measures they can take that really did result in significant water savings. And again, as Mr. Ash points out, our customers have done a really, really great job. You know, once they understood what was needed and how to do it, they really, really did a fantastic job. And which is a huge part of why we're doing as well as we are in these really, really tough times from a water supply standpoint. So that's, again, that'll be next week. You may have already received an email notice from Aqua, but I plan to shoot you an email too separately, so in case you want to participate, you're more than welcome to do that. And that completes our GM reports.
Thank you. And let us then go to director's comments. Director Akbari, did you have any comments?
No comments from my end.
Okay. Director Huang?
Nothing for me.
Then we go to reports. First one is the Continuing Legal Education Virtual Workshop of the California Water Agencies on Voting Rights in California.
Yeah, so here it's reporting that both you and I took this course.
I have signed. Okay.
Of course, I only took the course.
So we'll have to correct that.
And-
Thank you for
and-
pointing that out.
Yeah, and I already reported on that at the last workshop that we had. So
I
I
should
don't
pay
need to,
for it and I
don't
have
need
that.
to speak to it.
The opportunity to see it on,
No, I'll talk later about 7.3.
okay. 7.2 is we attended a Joint Powers Insurance Authority Executive Board meeting in Roseville. It was interesting to see how their operation, how they are handling things. I did have an opportunity to discuss PFAF issues with some of the staff, members of the executive board, and I note that about a week later, it appeared that JPIA has lowered the insured limits for PFAS and PFAS, the added PFAS to PFAS, and I'm told from $29.5 million to $10 million. The outstanding question I have, is there any ability to get supplemental insurance, difference in coverage, as they have with seismic? And to date, no one has been able to identify anyone that's willing to insure for the, for PFAS. On a side note, you may have seen some of the Camp Lejeune data that's floating around. That was trichloroethylene, TCE. And in one of the ads, they said they had $21 billion, the B is in bankrupt, to fund claims that were occurred prior to 1985, when they turned off the well. So it's been a national effort to publicize. But that's just one location for a different contaminant. The issue of fluorine is something that is going to, as we've just learned earlier this evening, be a major concern within the water industry. It's one of the black swans. And will probably be much more expensive than lead to deal with.
So on item 7.3, I'm a little biased in my report because I was one of the architects of putting this program together. But we were sold out Thursday and Friday. We had about 60 people, including Aqua staff, attend. Quite a few people from the San Joaquin Valley hopped over the hill to see what's going on in the Salinas Valley. And I thought we had two great tours on our field trip on Thursday. And I would just like to speak to one item where we were able to invite the Monterey County Agricultural Commissioner, the top guy for the entire county, to speak to us on Friday morning for about an hour. And it was very informative, everything that he was talking about in terms of the agricultural production and use of water throughout the entire Salinas Valley, the 600,000 acre feet of water that they store up in Lake San Antonio and Lake Nacimiento. And they use about 200,000 acre feet a year of that 600,000 for the entire amount of crops in the Salinas Valley. And they're doing all sorts of water conservation measures around there. I did notice, and I commented to a number of people that on my recent trips down in Monterey, I've seen a lot of the artichoke fields being taken out and Brussels sprouts being put in. And he confirmed my suspicion because artichokes have now dropped off the 10 top crops in Salinas Valley. And Brussels sprouts is now number 10 on the list and is a $100 million a year crop. And when I was a kid, nobody wanted to eat Brussels sprouts. Now every restaurant has to have Brussels sprouts on the menu. And there's a craze going on across the country. So they shift their crops based on what is the highest value crop. And various people from the agricultural industry said, whatever the demand is, that's what we will grow. I did ask one question about the effect of the cannabis trade on the use of water, because in Northern California, there's a lot of abuse of the water systems up there to feed the marijuana grows. And so I was very surprised when the agricultural commissioner said he has to leave out the growth of marijuana from his reports because he files them both with the state and the federal government. But he did note that they do keep track of it, and he has certain responsibilities for monitoring the business as it is in the county. Surprisingly, it's about the number 5 crop in all of Salinas Valley, about a $500 million a year business. And he said it is the most efficient water user in the county of any crop, and so you get the biggest bang for the buck investing in cannabis. And I'm familiar with, I have some friends that are involved in a LLC right here in Fremont that became early investors in just one property to take over the old abandoned greenhouses. And within only a few years, they've already made like a 10-time return on the investment for the LLC. And the returns are continuing because they're being paid out on a dividend basis. So there's a lot of wealth. It's a lot of high-tech wealth. When I talked to the commissioner offsides, a lot of high-tech wealth going into the investment in this certain industry sector in the valley. So we got a lot of positive feedback, and Mr. Stevenson attended, and Director Wheat, so I'll turn to them on their comments.
All right. Well, it was a very informative program. 2 portions of the tour that were just remarkable. One was the Marina Coast desalination facility, which is a tragic example of how not to do capital improvements in the water industry. A pile of rusted metal, water tanks were half full of sand, everything was rusted out, and it operated a short while, cost of several $1 million, and it was built about the same time as the desal plant in Santa Barbara, where they spent $40 million and produced 40 acre-feet of water. They shut it down. This was even a greater fiasco. So, percentage-wise, they had $22 million in legal fees. They got caught between the private and public interest and the craziness of Monterey County and when it came to the no-growth efforts. We visited the recycling facilities of Monterey 1. They have a 12 MGD recycling facility, 19% plus 19% of the water, which is the brine, to be released into the marine sanctuary, which they acknowledge their high concentrations of PFAS and have no solution once should the PFAS be declared a hazardous waste. So there's some extraordinary challenges out there, and as you get into the politics of water, not allowing Marina Coast to move their wells to a location where the salinity would be far less and it might be economically viable because it's a different district. It shows how the water policies can easily go off the rail. So, thank you.
$22 million in legal fees out to 4 different law firms. And the general manager said people were paying more for legal fees in their water bill than they were for water.
I know that GM comments on meetings attended is not on the agenda, so I'll keep my remarks really, really short, but I will say that attending that meeting, having those discussions, and seeing those facilities, understanding the context in which they operate, makes me really, really grateful for the investments our customers have made in proactive maintenance and alternate and a diverse portfolio of supplies. And the work that this agency did early in its existence on solidifying its sources of supply for the long, long term. And that is something that we can take for granted here and that doesn't exist everywhere.
Okay, well, thank you.
Could I give one more report?
You may, short, and then we'll adjourn.
So we had the Los Vaqueros Reservoir regular monthly board meeting yesterday, and for the first time, we met in person at the Grasslands Water District down north of Los Banos. And Mr. Wunderlich attended as my alternate, and President Weed attended as an observer to the meeting. It was the very first time that we had an in-person meeting of this JPA. So although we all kind of know each other from around the industry, it was really nice to have an actual board meeting in person. And after the board meeting was done, we had a nice lunch, short lunch, and then we went out for a field trip to 4 different sites to see where the benefits, on the benefit side of building Los Vaqueros Reservoir, Grasslands is one of the primary beneficiaries of water that will transit its way through the Delta. And so we got to see all of these wetlands and how they're trying to restore them and operate them, and the educational resources that they have available out there, and all of the hunting activities. And I think everybody thoroughly enjoyed the set of field trips. Having been there twice before, these are really precious wetlands with tons of wildlife. But I've been there twice before, once with the Water Education Foundation, and then I went with a friend in the wintertime. I think it was late January, early February. And if anybody goes at that time of the year, you're in for a delightful time. Yesterday, we were dealing with 1 million mosquitoes and bugs. But in the wintertime, especially, as soon as it freezes, the bugs disappear. And you can go out there and spend an entire day just really enjoying all of the wildlife on the Pacific Flyway. Tons of different kinds of different birds, raptors, river otters, turtles, real elk and antelope and deer. And you rarely get to see wild elk anymore in California, and those are some wonderful animals. You see all kinds of other things out there as well, and I highly recommend it. If you ever get a chance to spend a day, go out to the educational center out there at the wetlands and enjoy a day. So as part of the report, I would like to request that at least by the end of the year, in the next quarter, we have a report for the board and staff on where we are on LVE. We're making really good progress, and I think just showing the schedule of where things are would be very helpful to everybody.
I know I said it would be an adjournment, but I did note that the Water Supply Exploratory Committee of Valley Water met today. Really short agenda, but in that staff report, it was noted that the cost of LVE has increased 30% to $1.25 billion, which I have not seen reflected in our own pro forma, what we've put in our CIP. So that may go from 100 million to 130 million. Thank you.
All right.
Great. Any other items for the board? Great. Okay. We are now adjourned.
Okay, thank you.
9:27.